Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our second webinar research forum. The session this morning is on work-life balance, and I welcome all of you for participating. We have a busy daily schedule today. I'd like to remind everyone we have 4 sessions. We're starting off with a general theme of work-life balance at 8 o'clock. Then Dr. Denise Bogart will be moderating a session on diversity and inclusion at 9 a.m. Brian Myers will be moderating a session on managing and leading people at 10 a.m. And Robert Fletcher and Shirley Baker will be co-moderating a session on mentoring best practices at 11 a.m. and we'll have a 10-minute break between sessions. If you logged in a bit earlier, you saw the protocol for asking questions here. We've disabled the chat button, but the Q&A button is active. And what we're going to be doing is starting off with some introductory remarks from our panelists, and then opening it up for Q&A. So please, as you think of a question, enter it in through the Q&A, and we'll go ahead and address those later on in the session. This morning, we're going to be talking about techniques for managing stress, finding meaning and maintaining physical and mental wellness in an R1 institution. This is really a key topic now. I recognize the difficult times that we're in, the stress that this is causing on everyone due to issues of trying to be productive at work, perhaps working from home, dealing with issues with childcare, health issues, and financial issues. So this is a time when we need to be able to recharge and deal with stress. I've often stated that I use cornhole and play every night with my wife as a stress mediator, but luckily for all of us, our 4 panelists today have much more profound advice to offer than that to all of you. So let's go ahead and get started. We have Jose Dubé, Erica Goss, Matthias Kirst, and Carla Shelma who are joining us this morning. And we'll go ahead and start with Dr. Dubé. Let me give an introduction. Dr. Dubé is an associate professor of agronomy at the North Florida Research and Education Center in Marianna. His research program focuses on sustainable livestock production systems using legumes. He also has a very active international program promoting the use of novel dryland forages in Africa, for example, cactus. And he is a 2020 UF-IFAS International Fellow. Dr. Dubé has published 177 peer-reviewed articles and chaired 31 graduate students in his career. And as his former department chair, I can attest he does all this while never appearing stressed at all. And I have no idea how he does it. So Dr. Dubé, the floor is yours for the remarks that you'd like to make.
Thanks very much, Dr. Gilbert, for the introduction. Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'll be happy to share some of the things that I'm not sure the right things, but those are the things I do. So, so you asked us to address some of the questions, and one of them was, what are the key methods that you use to manage stress while maintaining productivity at work? I think the first and most important thing, you need to enjoy what you do. If you don't like what you do, you know, it's not gonna work. But if you do enjoy, then working is a pleasure and not a nightmare. So that's number one for me. But it is also important, even enjoying working, take the weekends off. Make sure that you do not bring work to your house. Make sure you do not turn on your computer to work during the weekends. I think that's really important for you and for your family, so that you kind of try to have a balance. It is also important to have a hobby, like Dr. Gilbert said, the cornhole hobby during the nights, alleviate his stress, but try to have something. I could be, gardening, some sport activities, fishing, whatever. For example, I enjoy taking care of my yard. I think mowing the grass brings some moments of reflection to me. Sitting there on the lawnmower for 2 hours, I think a lot about different things, and I enjoy doing that. But in order to stay productive, I try to set short-term and long-term goals. And in the short term, I try to set daily, realistic goals that I can do. And I put in my stick note on my computer, okay, those are the tasks that I need to do today. And I try to accomplish them before leaving. So if you have a big task ahead of you, and most of us have that, just break it down in smaller tasks. At the end of a year, you accomplish big things. If you run 1 mile per day, it doesn't look much, but at the end of the year, you're gonna run, 365 miles, and that's a lot, right? you cannot run that in one day, but if you run 1 mile per day, at the end of the year, you're going to be good. And so another question is, how do you energize and recharge yourself? I think it's important to take some vacation. Even if it's a short vacation, it is important to unplug sometimes. I also enjoy, grilling and meeting friends, and that also helps to energize, even if you're not on vacation, but that helps to alleviate the stress a little bit. One of the things that I do enjoy is traveling as well. So whenever it's possible, try to match, some of the activities that you do and also if you're traveling. And again, exercise is important. Make sure that I'm not go beyond the 5 minutes. So exercise is also important. So at the end of the day, try to run, try to walk, try to do something, and that's really important. How do I find meaning in work in personal life? That's another thing that Dr. Gilbert asked us to do. Like I said, I enjoy what I do, so getting the research and extension done is a pleasure. One of the best thing that I think on my career is when I see some research that I do adopted by a producer. It is also nice to see the progress of our students in their life. The work that I do in Africa, for example, helps to improve the livelihood of so many people. So that brings a lot of meaning to my career. In terms of the UF community that you use, we are here in Mariana, so students are part of our community. So you used to do, things together. Students play some soccer over the weekend. I know there are other resources available, but I haven't done that. So Rob, I think I'm at my 5 minutes mark. So there is also something else about the COVID, but I can address that later.
All right, thank you very much, Jose. Appreciate that. Now we'll move on to Dr. Erica Goss, who's joining us. She's an associate professor with an 80/20 research teaching appointment in the Plant Pathology Department at Emerging Pathogens Institute. Her research focuses on the evolutionary and ecological processes underlying plant pathogens, emergence and reemergence. She's lived in Gainesville for 9 years now with her spouse and children ages 11 and 5. Dr. Goss, the floor is yours.
Good morning. So I'm going to echo some of the things Jose has said. So finding my own way in this position and continually evaluating and reevaluating how I want to do the job has been really important for me to manage stress, maintain satisfaction, and recover from burnout. And one of the things I value about Ifas is that there are many different ways we do our jobs. So we all come in with a variety of teaching, research, and extension appointments, and that gives us, the opportunity to do the job in many different ways. So in contrast, when I was a graduate student, I largely saw one way of being a research faculty, and I knew I didn't want that job. So, and I think this is also relevant to the ongoing conversations about diversity and Black in STEM, is that we have to make room for different ways of doing the job to diversify the profession, and to be ourselves is important to be happy in our jobs. So pushing against sort of some of the traditional norms of faculty members of working all the time and being really stressed, largely set by white males in the past decades, I think is important for our mental well-being, for diversifying our profession, and for our students and trainees. So it sort of was a long and is an ongoing process for me to feel comfortable in this job and to figure out how I want to do my job and what part of the job energizes me, because that changes over time. So an important part of that is setting priorities. So like Jose said, we need to work on things that energize us and excite us. And right now is a good time for sort of reflection and setting priorities. So when I was facing some burnout was about the same time that UF joined the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity. So we have an institutional membership to that organization, and they have programs for faculty to help figure out how to set this work-life balance and be productive and successful at work. So I watched a couple of their webinars, and one of their core pieces of advice is to match your time to your priorities. And that sounds obvious, but a lot of times we come into our job, or just, you know, what we have to do is put out fires, deal with stuff coming at us, and we're not being proactive about setting our priorities. So if I'm more proactive in scheduling my time and projects, that makes me happier in what I'm doing, because I'm setting my agenda. It includes projects and activities that I enjoy. So I have to do the stuff I don't want to do, but I can put it on my schedule, know that I'm doing that for a limited time, and that later I'll get to something that excites me. So like Jose, I maintain a reasonable work schedule. I take weekends off a lot of the time. It's important because I'm the type of person that needs to do less to do more. So the more stressed I am, the more working, I tend to be less productive, and I need a lot of downtime to be sharp and be productive when I am working. So I would say that that took me a couple years to figure out, like, okay, I'm in a faculty position. I need to work really hard, like harder than I worked before. Well, you know, that probably wasn't the most productive approach. So I do take a lot of downtime. With my kids, I don't have my own hobbies. I feel like for the past 10 years, I've mostly been playing with them for my hobby, but I do a lot of sleeping. You might say my hobby on the weekends is taking naps. So finally, one thing that helped me over the years was having a professional support group. And I think that might be a valuable thing to think about now when we have a lot coming at us, maybe even outside of work. So this wasn't something I sought out. I kind of was lucky to fall into it. And the idea was to come together every about 2 weeks and troubleshoot professional issues. And sometimes it was personal issues interfering with professional issues or professional work. So even if I didn't always have an issue or concern that I wanted to bring to the group, I heard a lot of troubleshooting among members of the group that were at different career stages. And overall, it gave me some more perspective and made me wiser about the job and how I can do this job and, you know, deal with everything else that comes at us in life. So as one follow-up to this forum, I'm willing to help catalyze a group if there are people that are interested in doing that, but just don't know how to find one, which may be particularly hard at this time when we're all sort of isolated.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Erica. I really appreciate that, especially for your opportunity to help folks to find that support. The support groups are so crucial. For mentoring is an important part of our progress throughout our careers, not just as assistant professor, but for our entire time here. Thank you so much. All right, we'll move on now to Dr. Matthias Kirst. Dr. Kirst is a professor in SFRC. He joined UF as an assistant professor in quantitative genetics and genomics in 2005. His primary research interest since joining UF is the discovery of genes that regulate complex growth and developmental traits in plants. This work has been funded by NSF, DOE, and USDA, and is currently supported by a team of 4 postdocs and 3 grad students. Other areas of interest are in entrepreneurship and development of high-risk, high-reward research in genomic technologies, and potential for commercial application. This has led to the creation of a startup in genomic technologies and several patents related to the same field. Dr. Kirst, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob. Thank you for the invitation. Let me start by saying that I'm not sure I'm really qualified to talk about this, but I'm really going to refer more to sort of experiences that I've had over the years that hopefully they'll be useful for some. So I think, you know, the previous 2 panelists, they talk about some of the tricks that we all know are important, right? We need to be able to balance, allocate time properly, take our time on vacation. So I decided to not focus on that, but rather focus on one, I think, key component that I was really not aware of when I started in a faculty position. I think may not be very obvious to many people, and it's a concept that sometimes is referred to as essentialism. In other words, the idea that you truly should focus on essential things that make your life and your work meaningful. I certainly had a very unhealthy life-work balance when I started at UF. That was really unrelated to tenure, but rather more about the fact that I was embracing way too many things, you know, and there's this bizarre thing that happened when you get hired as a faculty. It suddenly appears that everybody thinks that you're an expert in many things that you actually are not. So we ended up having to be exposed and have to really work on areas that maybe are not the ones you're terribly interested about, and maybe you don't feel that you are really an expert. Now, most of the things that I was getting involved, I have to say that they were contributing, I think, very little to my career and to my work and personal satisfaction. I got to a point, I think in the early years, I think I was involved in 24 student committees. I had 8 visiting scholars in my lab. I had 4 federal grants I was juggling at the same time. And all of that was happening as I was running after the next pot of money to keep that machine going, right? And what I think I realized after a few years is that what was happening is that my attention was really being stretched in all possible directions. And I have to admit that I don't feel I was doing any of these tasks well. Okay, I think everything that I was doing, whether if it was mentoring students or if it was going after funding, teaching and so on, I don't feel it was being done very effectively, and I don't feel it was being done very well. So I think a few years ago, I got to realize this concept that this was not sustainable and that I should either change career or really refocus my career on the things that I thought were essential. And that led really to a number of changes. Again, instead of having multiple grants running at the same time, I now focus on strong, few projects that really bring me extreme satisfaction because they have an enormous potential to change people's lives. I have a smaller, but I think a more qualified, more high impact team of scientists that work with me. I choose now my collaborators very carefully, and the collaborators I work with today are absolutely extraordinary. They are always on top of what's happening. They respond very rapidly if I have any questions. So it's really an extraordinary team. And also, in a way, focusing on perhaps instead of writing the next paper, focusing on papers that really can have an impact and have a very high value, rather than going for volume, going for quality. So I think, in other words, the activities and the work style, my activities and my work style really have become much more focused on what I consider to be really essential, and really things that bring joy to what I do. So I think that's, that is my main message. Again, as I mentioned, many of those things that we discussed before are things that are certainly very important. A lot of times they depend on the individual faculty, but from my perspective, learning how to focus on what's critical and really put the energy on those things has really made a difference. So that's what I had for today.
Thank you very much, Matthias. Appreciate that. And I'd like to also comment too to everyone in the audience. Please feel free as you think of questions to go ahead and enter them, put them in the Q&A box now, and we'll address them in a bit here when we go to Q&A. Finally, I'd like to introduce Dr. Carla Shelma. She's an associate professor, extension nutrition specialist, and registered dietitian in the Department of Family, Youth, and Community Sciences. She also serves as a state program leader for nutrition for UF Ifas Extension. Dr. Shelma is the principal investigator of the Florida Nutrition Program, Florida SNAP Ed program, and the Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program, which teach low-resource families to make better food and physical activity choices. Her research focuses on addressing food insecurity, developing evaluation tools to assess the healthfulness of low-income neighborhoods and assessing the impact of nutrition curriculum on health behaviors. She is married to David Shelma, who's the principal at Gainesville High School. That's a challenging job as well, I imagine, at this point. And they have two daughters, ages 15 and 13, and a pandemic puppy named Ginger, who is a 17-week-old golden doodle. Dr. Shelma, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Gilbert, and thanks for having me. When I got the email request to serve on this panel, work-life balance, I kind of laughed a little bit because I'm like, work-life balance, that does not exist for me. You know, Eric and I were talking beforehand that it looks different for everyone. I started this position and my girls were 1 and 3, right? So as a working mom, I think we have different challenges than others, and my girls and my husband have always been my priority. And so anything I can do to maximize my time when I'm with them, I try to do. So the way that it would work pre-tenure, because, you know, you have to be really productive in order to get that tenure that you work so hard for. You know, with the girls, I had one at daycare on one side of town, I'd drop her off, then I'd have to drive to the other side of town to drop the other one off, and then go to work and then pick them up, come home, cook dinner. Because my husband, as a high school administrator, has night activities every night of the week, right? So he would pop home for dinner and then go back to work. And so when the girls were little, I would put them to bed, and then that night time would be my most productive time, right? So from 8 to 11 or 12 is when I would get that work in. And so I did that for years, just kind of fitting in work when I could. And I realized that I obviously don't have work-life balance. Somebody pointed out to me that I have a working life, right? So my job and my personal life are so interconnected because I'm fitting in work when I can so that I can spend the time with my family when I can. So for example, if, you know, my girls need a chaperone for school for a field trip, I'm going to go on that field trip, right? So that might take the whole day. I'm going to have my phone with me, and maybe I'm checking emails on the bus or, you know, throughout the day, because the programs that I run are pretty big. So there's always something going on. And then at night when I get home, after I've had this great day with my kid, I'm going to be back on the computer and working. And while I try not to work as much on the weekends, I still have to sometimes in order to get the work done. But as somebody said, I think it was Jose, that if you love your job, right, you have to really enjoy it. And I really do. So you've heard the phrase, if you love your job, you don't work a day in your life. And that's definitely true for me. So I spent all those years, you know, working the way that I did. I've accepted the fact that I have a working life and it works for me. You know, in order to manage stress, one of the things that I like to do is be physically active. So of course we have to fit that in on top of everything else we're doing as working moms. So the only time I can do that is when the girls are still asleep. So I do it in the morning from 5:30 to 6:30 in the morning. And that's how I get it in. And that's a priority for me. And it makes me feel better. And if I'm super stressed, that really helps me get, you know, some of that energy out, and I appreciate that. And I love what Erica said about having a professional support group. That is so important. I like to call them my squad, right? My own squad. And we have, instead of happy hour, we have power hour. And there's a group of 4 or 5 of us that are all working moms in different stages of our careers. And we get together as much as possible, or we email, and just kind of talk about work. We talk about life and kids, and we support each other, and you know, we're just there for each other. And that has been so important for me in being successful in managing stress and getting advice from this group. And I truly appreciate, you know, having them there. So again, I think my key messages would be, you have to love what you do. Work-life balance or working life, it's different for everyone. So you got to do what works for you. And it's okay that you feel like you don't have work-life balance. I think it's okay to have a working life if that's what works for you. And for all of you working moms out there, I got to say, I was just on a panel yesterday for Dr. Meyer's class, and I was talking about the fact that I had a working life and that I prioritize my kids and it's doable. And I had private messages from other moms who are students thanking me for saying that and acknowledging that it is hard. It's hard for working moms. I mentioned yesterday that working moms are amazing. We can juggle a lot of things and we do it well. And it is hard, but it is doable. And so get your squad, get your support group together. And again, I offer, if anybody wants to meet for coffee, I also enjoy that, to talk through some challenges at work as well. So enjoy what you do. And that's what I had to say.
Thank you so much, Carla. Really appreciate that. And I think you raise a really valuable point that there's no one size fits all here for how we handle this, right? And some have a very strict delineation between work and life, and some have, as you mentioned, a working life where it melds together. I think one thing we're learning through this crisis we're dealing with is how well people are able to work from home, how we can be more flexible in work arrangements for everybody, not just faculty, but staff and others in the organization, to allow them to have that flexibility to fit in work when they can and fit in their home life when they can. So thank you so much for that. All right, well, we'd like to open up for questions. Again, I advise the audience, any questions you may have, please enter them through the Q&A. Let's see what we have here. I have a question about new faculty orientation and what did the panelists take away from new faculty orientation with regard to work-life balance. So for some of you, that might have been a while ago. You'll have to remember back. But can you remember maybe just not just new faculty orientation, but perhaps as we talk about mentoring, some early advice you got in your career from new faculty orientation or other mentors earlier in your career that was helpful for work-life balance? Why don't we start with Jose? We'll go the same order we did. If people have something to contribute, please.
Sure. It's always important, Rob. I think here advice from more experienced folks, and I'm start with our mentors. We learn a lot different things from them, and of course each person has a different direction, and then you kind of filter some of those advices and kind of build your own way. The institutional faculty orientation, they're very important in my opinion. To indicate most of the resources that you have available, also to improve your network, finding new folks that have some similar issues that you have. But anyhow, I think it's valuable, and I think it's important, the faculty orientation and also the mentoring that you receive along the life.
Thanks, Jose. Anyone else like to comment on early career and particularly useful advice they received?
I guess I would say that you do get a lot of advice early career, and some of it is conflicting, or all of it is conflicting. And so it can be really, that process of filtering that Jose mentioned can be the challenge, and figuring out which part of that you want to embrace and what advice to discard because it doesn't work for you. I think, that process of trying different things out and figuring out what works for you and changing it when it's not working. Like, I had a separate work life time before COVID, but now, like Carla, it's all just mushed together. And it happens, that work happens at different times a little bit differently.
Yeah, I think I agree with Erica that there are many advice that's given early on, and there's not always an agreement about what is right and what's wrong. And again, it goes back to thinking that really everybody has their own different way by which they adjust to this crazy schedule. That can be the schedule of a young faculty. So I think it's take everything with a grain of salt and judge whether if that's a good advice for you. That's what I would say.
I guess I wouldn't say I remember advice because that was a long time ago, but I did have the department chairs that I've had have been amazing, supportive women who have been very understanding with the fact that I, have the job and we also have kids. So that has made a world of difference in that I'm not stressed out about my boss wondering what I'm doing, or if I'm getting my work done, right? As long as I'm getting my work done and excelling in that area, they understand that we have these other responsibilities. And so the chairs that I've had have really made a difference in my success. And so I so appreciate, Dr. Ronnie right now is amazing, and she's fully supportive of us. I mean, we're the Department of Family, Youth, and Community Sciences, right? So it just, it makes sense.
Thank you, everyone. And the next question is one that I had prepped you with, and I'm glad some of the audience asked it as well, which is how has your work-life balance changed in the past few months with COVID-19? Are your strategies the same? Have you had to develop new strategies? If they're new, do they seem sustainable, or you're just trying to get through this post-pandemic reality until we have a vaccine? So why don't we go in the opposite order? I'll start with Carla and go the other direction this time.
Yeah, this working from home, you know, and I enjoy working from home. I've loved having my girls home. You know, they were doing school, I was doing work. The difference though is that I'm on Zoom calls 8 hours a day, right? And I don't know what it is about Zoom, but by the end of the day, my brain is dead. I'm just done, right? And I don't even want to do work at night. So I've noticed that difference is I'm not working at night as much anymore because I'm just so tired from 8 hours of Zoom calls all day. So I feel like I'm more behind, right? And so I'm having to work a little bit more on the weekend. So I think my, not that I had work-life balance, as I said, but it's gotten a little bit worse because I have to add some more time on the weekends to make up for night work. Because when you're on meetings all day, you don't do actual work, right? You got to find some time to actually get work done. So I don't know that I have a good answer for that because it's not gotten better. It's gotten a little bit worse.
Matthias, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that one of the extraordinary things that have happened with COVID is that suddenly a lot of distractions I used to have disappeared. You know, I really feel that this has been a time that I've been able to really focus on some key issues, some key items that I wanted to get off the table quite effectively. In fact, I think a few weeks ago, I replied to an email to someone that was asking what I was doing. I said, I haven't been that busy, more busy now than ever again. So I think it depends a little bit on how, on what's been happening. I think in my way, some of the things getting out of the way has allowed more time to work on things I wanted to get out of the way.
Erica?
Yeah, so I used to just go to work and work all day and then come home and be home. And now I'm home all day and working a little bit and then taking breaks to have lunch with my family or play board games or card games with my daughter. So I'm still trying to schedule my time in the same way so I know what I need to get done, and putting a little bit more flexibility in my schedule so that I can take those breaks as, you know, and feel like I'm still getting done what I had planned to get done for the week. So yeah, a little bit more on the nights and the weekends, definitely, but maybe more healthy sort of 8 hours during the day where I'm not just sitting at my desk at the computer that whole time, but I'm taking breaks and having a lot of brain breaks. So, you know, maybe that's making me more productive in some ways. I'm not sure.
And Jose?
Yes, it's been an interesting time, you know, during this COVID, but for me, the most important thing was to keep my routine, you know, waking up early, get to the computer, you know, having working hours. And I was able to do that. I understand that some folks, they have young kids, you know, it's a different situation. So I think each person, you know, that works different. For me, it worked really well for the, you know, the grant proposals, papers, manuscripts, all that. But the problem was, you know, some of the lab and field work. And also I was worried with my students, you know, some international students, they don't have family here. And so for them was pretty stressful. You know, I tried, you know, to have lab meetings and, you know, address those issues, making sure that you had a plan B, you know, for them, you know, in case anything didn't work. But also at the end of the day, you know, I tried to get done by 5 and then, you know, go for a run or a walk in the neighborhood or things like that, just to alleviate a little bit the stress, because yeah, lots of Zoom meetings and you know, a lot of computers sitting there. But anyhow, at the end, it worked well. The main thing was, you know, the field and the lab, those things are, you know, we are backlogged, but we are catching up.
Thank you, everyone. The next question comes from an assistant professor. He likes the conversation. It makes sense, but he states, when you're on the tenure track, you're given advice on publish, and it's not easy, especially when you're in new faculty, very easily to get overloaded. What advice do you have for new faculty who want to be successful and get a lot done, but soon the workload becomes hard to manage? I'm struck by your comments, Matthias, about how you said at the beginning, I was overwhelmed by the number of projects. Now I focus in. But assistant professors, I mean, it's tough for them to do that early on. So does anyone have comments on that, how to advise our assistant professors out there?
So Rob, since you mentioned, because this relates to what I was saying before, I have to say that a lot of the things I was saying yes to were things that were not contributing to my tenure, the expectations of tenure. Okay, so in other words, setting up collaborations with lots of people when actually many people were not that strong collaborators, so they weren't really contributing to create a stronger research program also on my side. Bringing a lot of people in that maybe were not a good fit to my program. So my suggestion would be that you don't get set into this mindset where you say yes to everything, but rather you carefully judge whether if that is indeed a good a good connection, a good activity that I should get involved, and it will pay off. So I think that is a valid suggestion, because it is something that I think a lot of people will do early on, is to take on too many things, and many of those things will not be a very valuable.
Thanks. Can I follow up with that? How did you find out who was a good collaborator versus a non-productive collaborator without trial and error?
Well, that's so first of all, I think you can tell a little bit by enthusiasm, the people's involvement when you first approach someone to work with you. I found out that there are certain people that you will approach and they'll be very enthusiastic and they'll really connect with you. And some people will more is going to feel more like they're doing you a favor because you need that expertise in a grant proposal, and I think it ends up translating into perhaps not a very strong engagement later. So I think there are ways by which you can tell, largely by how enthusiastic those people feel in working with you. And also people have a very, very well-defined track record in terms of how well they collaborate with others. So if you can understand, if you can approach other people that have worked with those potential collaborators, I think it's also can be a good indicator.
Thank you, Matthias. I think in the interest of time, we're getting a bunch of questions now, so I'll go on to the next one. Several speakers mentioned reevaluating their work-life balance when it's gotten out of hand. Could they say more about how they've done that? So how have you identified this tipping point for you when you think it's gone out of hand, and how have you made that adjustment to correct? I'll open it up for anyone that wants to comment.
Well, for me, it was an accident and a week in the hospital. I think that defined that I had to rethink a little bit about how I wanted to spend the rest of my life. So that was definitely a tipping point.
All right. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, Matthias. Hopefully, I'm glad you got through that okay. Erica?
Yeah, I think if you're thinking, I can't do this for the next 10, 20, 30 years, that's a sign that something needs to change. And that was sort of my mantra as an assistant professor was, this is not a job for 5 years or 6 years or 7 years. This is a job I'm planning to have for decades, and I don't need to do everything now. I just need to, be happy and productive in the job. And I knew I had to get the work done, but trying to think about the long game and not just that 10-year goal helped with planning and prioritizing.
Thank you.
In my case, my traffic yellow light is my wife and my kids when they're saying, you're working too much, you haven't been home, you need to change something. So that was important for me, and know that they're growing very fast, and we need to have more time with them. That's important. Back to the assistant professor question, Rob, my advice is be strategic, know the role of the game, set the roadmap, and go for that, try to have those small little tasks every day, and then you'll get there.
Thank you, Jose. All right, we'll move on to the next question. And this is regarding offerings related to wellness, mindfulness, and health, which have emerged at UF. Have you used any of these to contribute to work balance? And are spaces or times created at your department or research center, for example, to appreciate such offerings of de-stressing, re-energizing in space? So is anything done at your department or unit, for example, and have you taken advantage of those resources?
I have not taken advantage of any of the UF resources. Like I said, the way I like to relieve my stress is to work out and to hang out with my family. So I've been doing that more on my own than the university ones. But I have seen some really great topics. A lot of my team members for my grant, we have a wellness committee. And so they spend a lot of time doing some wellness activities and really enjoy it. So.
Okay. Thanks, Carla. Anyone else? Well, thanks for bringing that topic up and making all the folks on the meeting aware of some of the resources on mindfulness that are available at UF. Another resource, which is here in the questions, is a book recommendation following Matthias's comments, Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less by Greg McKeown. That's M-C-K-E-O-W-N. And so until Matthias publishes his book on this topic, you might want to look at that. The next question, what is being done to align institutionally expectations for annual productivity, tenure, and promotion with the efforts to enhance work-life balance? That seems more like a dean question maybe than a panel question. Unless one of the panelists would like to chime in here on this. I don't see anybody stepping to the plate here. I mean, it's a good point, right? I mean, we're pursuing, we're top 5. We want to stay there. I think some of the comments I was going to make in my final remarks here, but I think that some of the things we do as an institution is try to support our faculty. Matthias talked about teams and trying to find good collaborators, and that's a lot of what we do in my office, for example, is try to provide resources to build faculty team science to raise the productivity of everybody together. And so, having the target program, sending teams to DC, having a lot of the seed grant funding programs that we have, we hope to be able to provide resources to faculty because frankly, I don't see the expectations in terms of publishing in high quality journals, getting grant funding, mentoring students. That's going to be there. And it's going to continue to be there as an R1 institution. We're not going to change our culture that way. What I think we can do is offer resources to faculty and have sessions such as this where we all get together and learn different ways to deal with stress and deal with work-life balance and recognize that and be more flexible about how we work together. So that's how I view things in terms of having open conversations with faculty. Certainly, we don't want faculty to get to a tipping point where they're ill and reevaluating and discouraged about their job. That's certainly something we want to avoid, and we want to work together to do that as a team. So, another question we had is, someone was curious to know how Erica and Carla got the idea to join or form professional support groups. Did that come from your mentors? Did it come to you independently? Did you talk together about this? And how did you go about that? How did you identify these folks?
I can jump in. These are women that we work together, like we collaborate on projects together and happen to really like each other. So we're just, we became good friends, and because we spend so much time at work together, and so organically we would just get together for coffee, talk about, our work, and then that started turning into the power hours, and we've done them by Zoom. So it just kind of happened. I'm a very relational person, so having those friendships are important to me. And so I think that when the relationship is stronger, the work is even better. So having regular contact with my squad, as I like to call them, is important to me, and it just kind of happened because we work together so much.
Okay. Thanks. Erica, would you like?
Yeah, this one was a little bit different. I think one of the members was involved in a workshop for women to help women in academia, and learned about this book called Every Other Thursday, Stories and Strategies from Successful Women Scientists. So it's about a professional support group and the stories of the women in that group. And they started a group here, and the goal was to gather, it was all women, but it doesn't have to be, women who do not work together, who are in different departments and aren't interacting professionally, so that they could provide sort of more objective advice about professional issues. And basically people were pulled in through, you know, networks at UF. So so I happened to interact with someone in the group, and they pulled me into the group. So in that way, it's, if you're doing something like that, it's hard to find that group. So that's why I think someone sort of needs to be the glue that catalyzes it, that brings it together. And for our group, the main person who was that glue got busy with other things and couldn't meet anymore. And so the group fell apart. So, you know, having a group of friends like Carla does can help keep that together.
Thank you, Erica. And then the final question I have here for the panel before we go to the concluding remarks, we have a comment on the research forum session on July 20th will have an offering on the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity. And Erica, I believe you mentioned that in your comments as well. Do you want to say just briefly what that is and how that was helpful for you to queue up the next meeting we have on July 20th?
Yeah, so it's a series of webinars mostly. They have a boot camp for faculty as well. And they do also offer on-campus workshops. And the idea is to help faculty who are dealing with all the problems that have come up in the questions, feeling overwhelmed, overworked. It's focused on faculty who may be underrepresented in academia, and so maybe are asked to do a lot of extra service and representing that take their time away from their scholarly work. So how do you balance all the service and teaching you need to do and be successful and get tenure? So that's, I think, the focus of that program. But there are a lot of resources also for mid-career and beyond, for people, you know, reevaluating how they want to do their job.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Erica. Thanks to all the panelists here. So I think we heard some common themes, which I'll summarize here in some concluding remarks. We heard that organization is key here to a work-life balance, or even in a working life. You have to schedule activities. This is something I did as an assistant professor when I started. I realized that I was doing all the urgent but not necessarily important things first and putting writing papers last, and that wasn't going to work for me for a career in academia. So scheduling time to write, scheduling time to work on grants, the harder, more strategic activities, and making sure that was on the schedule was very important. And I think it's we're hearing from the panelists. In terms of the need to take some time off, the need to exercise or have other hobbies to be able to de-stress, I've always admired not the folks that were the most stressed out and the most miserable and productive in their careers, but the ones who were so well organized that they had a family life and had a life outside of work and still were well respected in their professions. And that's been a goal that I've had. And when I choose folks to mentor me, which I still do as a dean, I still need to have mentors, and those are the folks that I choose to look up to and find out how they manage that. And I think we've heard that from the group as well. So mentoring and supporting you in your career are so important, and it's something that you start early on. As an assistant professor, you should be very active in identifying folks with your chair or your center director to serve on your mentoring committee, and then continue that on as an associate professor and full professor. Have folks that you really admire, and you're not going to admire one person for every single part of their career and what they do. You might have a portion you admire the research program of one person, or the work-life balance of another person, or the extension stakeholder interactions of another person. Make sure to triangulate and get that information in. And finally, I'm glad we heard different perspectives from the panel, because it clearly is no one size fit all. Everyone has different personal home lives, everyone has different assignments. And so I'm hoping that the breadth of what you heard today was useful for you, and you're able to pick and choose some of the strategies from our panel. So thank you so much to everyone for your participation. It was really uplifting for me. I appreciate all the panelists, and thanks for the great discussion and the questions. So we're going to have a 10-minute break now. Please stay online, everybody. Don't go off online, just stay online, and we'll have a break, and we'll start with Dr. Bogart moderating our very timely discussion on diversity and inclusion at 9 a.m. Thanks to everyone.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
I need to unmute yourself.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Keith, there you go. Good morning.
I tried to unmute a few times, but it didn't do it.
Good morning, Dana. And good morning, there she is. And I saw Dale down there. Dale, you are.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm putting my video on start video. I'm just making
okay.
trying to make my office pretty, right? So make sure that I'm
There you go. All right.
Like,
Everyone's here.
Looks like we're still recording, by the way. Just says recording.
Great, great. That's great. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us today. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to talk to you a little bit about the Ifas Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And let me just briefly introduce our panelists here. On one side of me, I don't know which side it might be on your screen, but I see Keith Diem at this end, and then Cece Suarez as well, and Dana Lecre. Hey, Dana. And
Hello.
Laughing House coming all the way from Fort Lauderdale to be with us today. So thank you for spending some time to do this. We are going to give you a brief overview of the goals that we've been working on the past year. And but before we got started, when this was presented to us, we assumed we would be talking for a full 15 minutes about the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. But of course, with what has been going on recently, we know that we need to spend some quality time during these 15 minutes to talk about those issues and leave some time on the floor to discuss what we've been dealing with the last several weeks. And so I know that we've all been impacted by the killing of George Floyd, as well as others in our recent history. And it's really important to acknowledge that it has been very painful and challenging and burdensome for our Black community members. And for some of us, it's really hard to express how we feel about that. We have a difficult time talking about those issues with our colleagues. And, you know, it's just really hard to know just what to do, right? I think we've all been feeling that way. And for others in our community, you know, this is just this has become a common occurrence, and it's even more difficult. You know, we're not going to be able to solve all of that in 15 minutes, but we hope to be able to share some initial ideas, some starting points on just how to begin, how you start those critical, crucial conversations. You know, how do you self-educate? Where do you go from here? And how do you deal with this from all those different perspectives, all the perspectives that each of us bring to the table? You know, it's really just the beginning of the conversation. And so so we do want to recognize that. And so we will be giving you a brief overview of the diversity and inclusion group, but we do want to share some thoughts that we might have on how to deal with these conversations. And before we get started, the panel thought that it would be really appropriate at this time to take a moment of silence and reflect upon this. I know that Dr. Fox provided that opportunity last week, and some of you may have participated and some of you may have not, but we would like to do that today. So in light of that, let's just go ahead and take a moment here and you know, get your thoughts together on that, and then at the end of that, we'll get back and talk about some of our goals. So so now, you know, let's just take a moment here. Okay. I want you to know that that was just a minute, all right? So that was just a minute, and we all know 8 minutes is a really important number right now, and that was just one. So maybe later on this week you can sit for 8 and see how long it truly is. Okay. All righty. So let's talk about Ifas and the Ifas Diversity and Inclusion Committee. About a year or so ago, you know, I got with Jack and I said, you know, I really think it's important that we have this committee. We have a new Chief Diversity Officer, and Ifas is doing such wonderful things. And there's really no one resource to reach out if others have the need and want to know who to ask. And so he said, yes, go ahead. So we are a group of Ifas volunteers, and you know, we've gathered together to discuss diversity and inclusion issues, both negative and positive, that are relevant to Ifas. And our goal is really to offer programs and events to self-educate, provide those resources so that we can strengthen Ifas's commitment to a more inclusive, diverse, and equitable community. So we've been functioning now for just a year and a half, and I think we've really pulled together a great group, and others are asking to join and how they can also participate in this. And so one of the first goals that we did, and this is kind of something that was bounced off of by the Chief Diversity Officer, was to have this one place where we could go as a community to find out what Ifas is doing in this regard. So I sent out a survey, and it's time now to update that survey to get an idea of what kind of programs and events were being offered out there. And so that document is actually listed on our Ifas Diversity and Inclusion webpage, which is located off of Ifas Human Resources page. And it's one document. You know, you can go there, you can look, you can find out who might be teaching this particular class and whether or not you might be interested or might want to utilize that as a resource for your own purposes. So that was one thing that we did. We've also, with the guidance and the enthusiasm from our administrative team, we have championed the concept that all departments, all units have their own diversity and inclusion committees. And so on that same website, we have provided some resource tools to help you achieve that goal. And because several of our departments had already been in the process of doing that. So they've been through all those stumbling blocks and have created some really nice templates for each of the units. And so or they graciously have lent them to us, and we put them up there on the website. So we hope that you take a look at those. And then if you recall last year, we also provided some events, some professional development types of opportunities, and some of you participated in those. If you recall, we had an expert from the psychology department come and talk about implicit bias. We also had Antonio Fares come and talk about the university's goals for diversity and inclusion. Those were some of the events. And then the suffrage, anniversary of the women's suffrage movement is also something that we were participating in, and had several events at the beginning of the year. And we hope to be able to pick up as we come to the end of this year and closer to the actual anniversary in August, and provide a few other events in that regard. And we are also a base for the Search Advocate Committee and the Search Advocate process. And as you know, that kind of was something else that Ifas was in the forefront of. And I want you to be aware that Ifas is looked at by the rest of the university campus as front runners in this regard. And we have been asked multiple times on how to take the search advocate process, how it could be utilized in other colleges, and could we share that information, and other branches or modifications of the search advocate process have been utilized in some of the other units. So I think that you all should be very proud of that. So what a great idea. That was actually developed before I even came, by Marianne Morgan, and I'd like to give a shout out to her for that. So that was a really great idea. And I just wanted to add that none of these programs would be possible. Yet again, another shout out to the Ifas Human Resources and Diversity staff, who are actually behind the scenes and taking all the great ideas that come from the committee members that feed up from you to them. They are the ones that are actually doing the technical expertise and putting together these events, and managing the website. And that is something that Dana does quite well for us. And without her, we would not be able to accomplish that. So they are the power behind everything that we can accomplish in our department in order to make these things happen. So, all right, on that note, that's probably a good segue for Dana. I'm gonna let Dana Lecre, she is our Ifas recruitment specialist, and she's gonna share with you some of the processes that we've put in place in terms of recruitment, and also discuss a little bit on the search advocate process, Dana. So open the floor to you.
Alrighty, thank you, Denise. So the search advocate process is kind of a continually evolving one. It began with a bunch of us that took the Oregon State University search advocate training. We also have some folks that went through the Michigan model, so that the Oregon State was really kind of based on having one fully trained search advocate in a committee, and they would kind of be the advocate for the search process, how to make it more diverse. As things went on, where the Michigan model was everybody on the committee was trained, which is kind of the goal. So UF Ifas is sort of making a hybrid. We're blazing our own trail as usual. So we're kind of making our own process with that. Some of the changes to the search process that have already come about, we have learned that the search advocates are most effective when they're involved right at the ground level, working with the position announcement, kind of taking a look at the qualifications, seeing where they can be altered so that we can draw from a pool that's outside the traditional ones or just higher education. One of my favorite examples is Dr. Diem saying in a search committee meeting, you know, why are we requiring university teaching experience? Why can't it just be teaching experience? So that's kind of the idea there. So we've also taken a look at some of the language of the position announcements themselves. We've gotten rid of gendered language. Wherever we can, we're switching to the they, them pronouns so as to be more inclusive. We just recently, very recently, moved the statement. We had a really nice statement in there about what Ifas is. You know, we're committed to creating an environment that affirms diversity, and we particularly welcome applicants who can contribute. And traditionally, that's been included at the very bottom with kind of the legalese disclaimer that we have to put in there that UF is an equal opportunity institution. And the bell just kind of went off and like, this is so important to us, why are we not leading with that statement? So we've just moved that forward. And I believe Dr. Diem's going to talk about the training that we're coming up with. We're seeing more searches use the criteria matrix that is up on our search guide, which is a really fantastic tool. It's kind of effort heavy at the front, but it really pays off. And it's a spreadsheet where the search committees, when they're making up the position announcement, can list the qualifications, whether they're required or preferred, the relationship to the job, and how they would be evaluated. And so that we're leaning on our committees more and more to use that, and they're adopting that as well. So in the interest of time, I'm going to keep it short. And if anyone has any questions, you can either put them in chat or just email them to me directly. And I will put my email in the chat for those of you that don't have it readily available. So, Denise, back over to you.
All right, Dana, thank you. And of course, let me just reiterate that if you have any questions, please go ahead and use, I guess it's the question and answer feature down at the bottom of your screen. All right, Keith, Dana just gave you a nice segue. Would you like to go ahead and talk about our new program and search advocate process?
Or she stole my thunder. I took off 2 of my bullet points. So good morning. Yes, that's good. Just kidding. Dana's been an absolutely great resource. So for all the people who work on search committees, I think Dana's really helped with that, trying to lay out a process for you to do, especially as we're now trying to make sure we're more inclusive in our search process and hopefully looking for the best candidates that might diversify our workforce. And there was a couple dozen of us who went through some training for the search advocate process that was mentioned earlier a couple summers ago. And then we've been serving on a variety of search committees. We've been appointed to search committees by the departments for the last couple of years. And frankly, there aren't enough of us. And we are starting to think about, you know, how might we do this better? But I can say, and maybe the departments who've had search advocates appointed, and maybe they can speak on this, but I think it's been successful for what we have done. I think the best thing that we've done is bring an outside influence, and usually we're asking questions. We're just looking at things from an outside viewpoint and saying, you know, why do you require this? Why is it important that the person comes from this field? Why is it that you are only looking at these places to recruit? So I think it's been good, and we've made it clear in the beginning, we're just there mostly as a resource to maybe ask those hard questions that maybe the people in the department maybe not have thought about. But using that matrix is helpful as well in regard to what are the requirements of the position. So as the success story that Dana mentioned, that something as simple sometimes as, why do we require university teaching experience for a lecturer position? Why would it not just be someone who's a great teacher? So as an example, one department for a lecturer ended up hiring a very successful, I believe it was a high school teacher, to be a lecturer in the department. So sometimes something as simple as a couple word changes is all that matters in regard to seeking people who are people we might not have otherwise thought to hire. We might have limited their ability to be considered. And that segues into our new strategy because we're realizing there really aren't enough of us trained as search advocates who are available to be serving on search committees. Because as you know, a search committee can be quite involved when it comes to the time, the commitment, and to be involved from early on all the way through interviews. Sometimes just the scheduling alone becomes problematic. So what we've tried to do is think about a new strategy of involving more people, maybe a hybrid of the Oregon State model, the University of Michigan model, and others. And one of the things we were going to do, it was going to be a couple months ago, the goal was to implement a new strategy. It was going to be an in-person training, and the title is still currently tentatively called Empowering More People, Empowering Search Committees to Advance Diversity and Inclusion in UF Ifas. And our goal was to empower more people that could be trained in the search committee process in regard to coming at it with a diversity and inclusion viewpoint as they approach the search process. So the pilot was going to already be in place maybe a month or so ago to try this out and to see how, to evaluate it, to see how successful it was and make improvements. But because of COVID, obviously we're not doing any in-person training. So I'm in the process now of trying to convert this to an online course through Canvas Catalog. And it would be a free course that we're going to try to get as many people in IFAS as possible in the next few years to be trained. Our goal is to have more people on any given search process that have already gone through this training. So we're hoping it will be maybe a 2 to 3 hour sort of a training that would combine synchronous and asynchronous, that would allow people to learn from each other as well, to get some basic background, but also to go through some scenarios where we're going to do some in-person activities, but now we're going to try to find ways to do some synchronous meetings by Zoom as well for this training. But we hope it will help the faculty and eventually staff as well who go through this. That will help them personally, not just for the search committee process, but would help them in other efforts they do, whether it's teaching, research, extension, anything that they do. This will also help inform them in helping us, empower us basically to be better advocates for diversity, equity, and inclusion in UF IFAS. So let me just summarize what the main points of this training will be. The subtitle of it's going to be Casting a Wider Net instead of constructing a narrow funnel. Because what we find out is people start limiting who they can consider right from the beginning. And we're going to try to have more people be considered as we go through the search process, so we don't eliminate some potentially good candidates right off the bat. And it'll be divided into the idea in regard to position description writing process, the recruitment process, the interviewing process, and the selection process, and trying to keep our net as wide as possible for the people we will consider hiring, because our goal is to hire a diverse workforce, and whether that's diversity in racial ethnicity, whether it's the idea of gender, whether it might be just different schools of thought, different places people have gotten their degrees and training, diversity in the most diverse thought process. So that's the goal. And we'll hear about this more. Hopefully by this summer, we're going to get a pilot started with the first group of people. And we hope it'll be something good for you as a professional, not just because for the search process.
Great. Thank you, Keith. We do have a couple questions in the chat and or in the question and answer section. And let me see. There we go. Hang on a second. I don't know if you can see those, Dana. Oh, Dana answered two
I've,
via text. Oh, okay. Dana's taking.
I've answered a couple and I'm taking them down. We're getting some really good points in here.
Yes, thank you. Sarah Lynn, thank you. You have some really good points, as well as some of the other folks who have written in, and we'll try to answer those as we move forward. If we have some additional time, we'll also see if we can't talk a little bit about them. All righty then. So, Dale, would you like to share some thoughts about your department's goal of setting up a diversity and inclusion committee and how all that came about, and provide some insight on that particular goal that we have had this year?
Yeah, I'll do that. So thank you everyone for being here. So Dr. Bogart asked me to comment on the agronomy department and how this was started. Again, I wasn't leading this, but I was part of the creation of a committee. So the way it started was that our department chair, who's Dr. Rowland now, I mean, we had conversations before about different aspects of the department, diversity and inclusion and equity, and how to go forward being in the agronomy department especially, and also aspects of extension, which is unique to Ifas in comparison to other parts of the university. And so, and she let me know that we were setting up that task force was being set up, which is actually was headed by Dr. Dubu, who spoke earlier. And I think more at the beginning we were appointed or asked, would you like to join? And then we got together as a task force to see who was on the committee, who was, on the task force, and should we include or invite anybody else? And we did that. And the task force was, as its department focus, was formed not just by faculty, but by staff and also by students. And we had a postdoc at the beginning to understand all levels of interests and concerns from, staff concerns could be different than faculty concerns, that could be different than postdoc concerns, and student concerns within a department, right? From there, we created a mission statement talking about number of people on the on a potential committee, who can lead the committee, if students are allowed or postdocs are allowed, or staff, and we came out staff and faculty are the ones that would be a leader of the committees. And then we presented these bylaws for a department vote. So does the department believe that we should have a committee, not just a task force? And that was approved by the department. And now the committee, we kind of reorganized, and it's headed by Dr. Dia Lawrence now. So with, again, our focus, especially we've been going back and forth now with everything that's happening, is what is our focus really? Because IFAS has committees, other departments have committees. Are we, with our focus, the department needs? So for example, next week we're talking about GRE. So some of these departments, how do we make sure that we get because the GRE, we're changing to outside the GRE. So what are the other things or other criteria we'll be looking for to make sure that we include diversity, inclusion, and equity, and more people, but also at the the department level. And other things that we're talking about is the extension part, because especially agronomy, everyone does, but we deal with stakeholders that may not have the same thoughts as everyone else. And so how do we go with that? And then so at the IFAS, at our level, the IFAS committee, we also Dr. Bogart can talk about, there's also extension, 100% extension agents on the committee to talk about their concerns of what their needs and what they see day to day out and around the state. So.
Great, Dale. Thank you. So appreciate that information. If anybody has any questions about how to set up a committee in your organization, in your department, please let us know as well. And I just want to also say that these questions are really great. Some of them we can't really answer thoroughly in the time that we have. So we will get back to those folks as we move through these questions. So let me just hold on a second before we get to Cece. Let's see. read this one. We are aware, there is a question here about equity as it relates to salary levels in our faculty ranks. And I do want you to know that we have provided data to the executive group in regards to that. That is a question that does often come up about women's salaries dependent on rank as compared to men. And so we do provide that information. And when salaries are negotiated, the executive committee does ensure that they are as equitable as they possibly can be under the circumstances, but we are constantly providing statistics in regards to that. And so we are, want you to know that we are looking at that more thoroughly and trying to help the executive group ensure that we are more equitable among gender levels. Let's see. There's a good question about developing retention and of focusing on initiatives with diverse faculty and the development of retention and promotion of diverse faculty. These are all great ideas and actually would require yet again another hour to talk. So we do want to save time for some of the other issue that we wanted to talk about today. And so keep the questions coming, and we will try to address these as a group later on. So I'd like to lead the rest of this discussion with Cece and ask her if she could go ahead and provide us with some ideas, like as pretty much what we talked about when we first started this conversation today, some tips and ideas on how we process the events that we're seeing and dealing with in these crucial conversations that are coming about as a result. So I'm going to leave the rest of the time to Cece.
Thanks, Denise. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for logging in today. As Denise said at the beginning, we are focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion as it relates to our efforts in Ifas. And also during this time, over the last 3 weeks, the issue of racial injustice has been amplified and broadcast worldwide, specifically amplified with the killing of George Floyd, but there have been countless others, right? So thinking about, it's not just this instance, but there have been many others, Breonna Taylor, Tamir Rice, the list is very long. And so this isn't a new incident. And that's important to acknowledge specifically when we're thinking about how to understand this situation for ourselves, but then also how do we support the education of individuals in our departments, and also specifically individuals who identify as people of color, students of color within your department or in your classes. So that is also something really important to think about, that this is not a one-time situation, but it has been going on throughout history. The first thing I would like to say is it's important for us to just acknowledge that it happened, right? That something occurred. In certain spaces, when we are afraid to talk about something or don't know how to talk about something, we choose not to say something. However, many communication experts would tell you not saying something is still saying something, right? If we don't say anything, that still conveys, and that can still convey to individuals in our department, students in our classes, people in our meetings, that we, one, don't care enough about what's happening, and two, don't want to hold space for anyone who is emotionally or mentally impacted by what is happening. And so an example of this could be in a classroom setting for those of us who teach, is that there are times when students just want to know that their faculty member is okay with having them come to talk to them about something that's going on, particularly related to the incidence of racial injustice in society. If we don't acknowledge that that's happening, that student might take that as an indication that this is not an okay space to talk about that. So that's an important thing to think about. The other thing too is that just naming it allows people to understand that you know that there is something going on. That is extremely important. So again, saying nothing is still saying something, and saying something very loud, actually. The other thing that I'd like you to think about is self-education, right? This is something, again, like I've said, that it's not new. People have been writing about it, researching it, publishing things, trying to get people to understand that this is a serious matter. And as such, there are lots of resources currently circulating. University of Florida, I know the library actually has one resource specifically geared towards understanding and self-education of anti-racism practices, how to be more inclusive in classrooms. And I know Denise has a list available, but the library sent out an email as well about it. So self-education is really important. The way this works is that it's important to self-educate, so that way when you are engaging with individuals, or you are trying to put together a focus group or a working group on whether it be getting a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee together for your department, or if you're just trying to meet with maybe your research group or your research lab, that you are prepared to talk about how you feel about the situation. The first important part is to listen, of course, right? It is not a okay practice to question how people are feeling about this, in particular communities of color. What's important is to listen, but then also for yourself, identify some key things that for you are really important for you to understand and digest. That also takes the onus, puts the ownership on ourselves individually, and doesn't necessarily point the finger at individuals of color, students of color, people of color, to be the ones to educate anybody else about racism, because this isn't new. So the important thing is to self-educate. There are wonderful resources, like I said, the Center for Teaching Excellence. Next Monday, I will be giving a workshop on anti-racist theory and teaching practices in the classroom. That's also a wonderful opportunity. Also, one of our faculty members who used to work at UF, Dr. Ibram Kendi, does also have a few books that are out there for children and adults as well. These are easy opportunities to self-educate. That means a lot. Speaking as a person of color, knowing that individuals who I engage with or people who I work with who have taken the opportunity to self-educate is really helpful, because it shows me, and I can only speak for me, it shows me that people have been trying to do some work to take the load off of it being just me to speak for whatever is going on, or whatever issues people want to talk about. Someone made a comment about, Sarah, I wanted to say thank you for making the comment about it being additional labor for individuals who identify as people of color, or marginalized populations, in particular race and ethnic racial and ethnic identities. This is very, very important to think about, right? The fact that while this is our expertise, this may be, this is my expertise. It's not every person of color's expertise. Just because we live it doesn't mean that we are the person to talk to about it. However, in my case, I am the expert of this in my research and in the outreach that I do. And so that, coupled with all the other junior faculty expectations, do increase the amount of time that I spend on this service, but potentially can decrease the amount of time that I would be spending on research and grants. So that is something that's really important to think about. I'm not just saying it because, right, I want to be acknowledged for all the work. That is not the case, but it's important to acknowledge that there is an additional burden, an additional weight on people of color who are being asked to speak to help educate others. So Sarah, I wanted to say thank you for that. So I'm going to leave it at that. But what I do want to just leave off with is please take the time to listen. If we are listening to news briefs or reading blogs or things like that, and we are upset by what we read, frustrated by what we read, don't agree with what we read, I would offer to take some time to think about why do we not like what we're reading, right? Why do we feel a certain way about what we're reading? Because to situate where we are before we go out and talk to others is really important. It's important to make sure we know where we stand before we are trying to connect with other people. The second thing I would really like to offer is self-education. Like I said, there are lots of resources out there. I would start with larger organizations. Like I said, University of Florida Library has some really good resources. There's also organizations like the NAACP that also offers a large list of resources online that could be a good starting point. And then finally, just offer up the opportunity to be very genuine. When you are engaging with individuals and talking, saying something is extremely important, and saying something at this point, I would really urge is not an option. So I want to leave it there and say thank you for your time for the short 5 minutes.
Thank you, Cece. I know it's a short 5 minutes. Does anybody have anything they would like to share in regards to that, in terms of having these kinds of critical conversations? Is there any questions in the chat or in the Q&A in regards to that? We'd certainly be able to answer a few of those questions in the little bit of time that we have. Oh, I do see one question down here at the bottom. Given the need for DEI training, shouldn't there be some form of mandatory education for every new employee that ensures a minimal level of understanding? What a great question. And that is exactly one that we raised with our leadership team last we met, and we've been told that, yes, go forth. So we will be putting together, in fact, the program that Keith is working on now, while it does have a focus on the search process, our belief is that everybody will be at some time involved in some sort of interview or search process, whether you're faculty or staff. Your opinion is always valued, and so we will be making that mandatory for every employee. That is exactly the goal that we're going to have, because the program does provide some information on implicit bias. Oh, Keith, if you want, I saw you just unmuted there. Did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think you asked me to see if I could share some feelings and thoughts of some of the students that are at UF right now. I'm this summer, I've been teaching a graduate course on diversity and inclusion, and the timeliness couldn't be more crucial. And the fact what CC said, the training she's done, she's gotten a lot of input from the variety of people that she's served as well. So I thought I'd share a couple of the things that might be useful to our faculty, whether research or teaching or extension, but especially in the context of this research forum. I've encouraged the students in my course to integrate current events into the discussion forums and assignments. The course I'm teaching now is a graduate course. It's an online course. It was always meant to be online. It wasn't just because of COVID. But online, there's quite a bit of the course that does discussion and through the discussion forum. So just encouraging students to utilize current events as part of the discussion and their assignments as well, and making sure they know that it's okay. And we've also had a lot of uncomfortable conversations about race, privilege, etc. And that's kind of the goal is as CC said, if we as the faculty and staff can make sure it's shown to be okay to talk about these things, sometimes we have to broach the subject. And once we do, people will be more comfortable possibly in talking about these topics. And really, I found that students want to see change and they want to be part of it. And I know it's not just because I have a course in diversity and inclusion. I really believe there's people in a variety of settings that we have at the university, whether it's research or teaching or elsewhere. And so some of the things I think we can do as part of our work, for instance, in my program planning and evaluation course, we learn about understanding our audiences and being sure to consider the needs of underrepresented, underserved audiences. And a phrase that I've used with our students is that let's don't do programs to people, not even doing the programs for people, but trying to do it with them. So if we're more engaged in our community and people that maybe are marginalized populations, it might be they might be more interested in really feeling like we're doing something that's helpful. And we might consider that in our research as well. Are we doing research that's going to serve audiences that are not necessarily being served in the past? Are the results we have in our research, how are they going to help communities that are underrepresented or communities of color, for instance? Are we using culturally relevant teaching and research methods to make sure that we consider different approaches that might be used by different audiences, not just people like ourselves? And even just something as simple as, are we involving a diversity of students in our classrooms and labs? Just something as simple as, in the last 5 years, the teaching assistants I've had for my undergraduate course, I've had a white male who was not a traditional background. Even though he was a white male, he was someone who's mature, came from another department. I've had a female LGBTQ background. I've had two females who are Black students. One of them is a mature student who has international experience in what we do. So any way we can involve people that that are engaged in what we do, that represent the people we're trying to serve, and maybe give us viewpoints different than ourselves or our students, can be helpful. So these are just some tips and some thoughts from the students that I've been working with just now during some of these really difficult times.
Great, thank you, Keith. I just wanted to point out that there is a slide now up that offers some of the resources that the Diversity and Inclusion Committee has been putting out over the last 2 weeks. If anybody's looking for additional resources, and also to give you the link to the Employee Assistance Program. If you were actually to click on that, you will also find links or additional links and resources in regards to the issues that we're dealing with today. So I encourage you to make use of that if you need so. And as more resources come to us, we will send them out to you. And the rest of campus is doing the same. There's been a great deal of sharing. So we will definitely let you be a part of that community. And so I think we're almost done here. We have about 2 minutes, and I just want to say we really appreciate that you asked us. Somebody said, where are you posting these resources? We'll post the resource list on our website. It's not there right now. We've just been going ahead and sending them out via the Ifas all listserv as they come to us, but we will certainly post them in one spot going forward. Does anybody on the committee and the panelists, would you like to say anything in the last minute or so that we have? Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
I would just like to two things to note. One, you don't have to have a quote unquote like diverse person population in your department to talk about diversity, right? To make it important. So even if you're in a department that is majority white, or identify, or if everyone identifies as a white individual, it is still a space to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I don't want it to seem like you have to recruit to then talk about it. It should be, and it might be a helpful recruitment tool for individuals of color who are interviewing to note that the department they're interviewing for is already taking measures to talk about this and incorporate practices into the department. And the last thing I would say as a reminder is, there are no one-stop fixes for what is happening. Right? This, like I said in the beginning, this is not something that is just started. It has been happening. And so to attend one workshop, that's a start, but it is not a one-time, you take it and everybody is healed from racism. And so I just want to offer that this is going to take a lot of time, more time than anyone can offer individually. So I'm hoping that it would be a group effort to educate and continue the education of ourselves, as well as other individuals who look up to us as mentors, teachers, advisors, etc.
Thank you, Cece. And I think we did say at the very beginning of our discussion today that this is just the beginning of a long conversation, and it has been going on for a while, and it will continue. So thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate that. Dana, Dale, any last parting words?
Cassie kindly offered to send us a copy of the Q&A questions for those of them that didn't get an answer or require a more in-depth consideration and answer. So we'll be taking a look at those and gathering resources and hopefully answering them as soon as possible.
Thank you.
I think the Diversity and Inclusion Committee was committed to, use this to help us in our future agenda for our meetings, topics that are going to be more complex than we can deal with today.
Exactly. Thank you, Keith. Dale, anything?
I just wanted to reiterate that IFAS is, like I said before, IFAS is special as we work with other stakeholders, right? And we brought up this conversation about how do we engage or how do we work with stakeholders in general. And this is a great point, a great part. If anybody out there has ideas or has worked through these, just, personally, I'd like to know. And I know that a lot of us on the committee are trying to, how do we go forward with that, which is outside sometimes our control, right? Of what we, within what UF IFAS does within the campus or the campi.
Oh, great. Right. We didn't even get to the stakeholder issue. So thank you for bringing that up. And that, yes, that is very important. And if you do have any ideas, we have been talking about that in our committee. So we appreciate that. All righty then. I think we've run out of time. Oops, we've gone over 2 minutes. We didn't get the gong or the hook, but thank you so much for having us here today. We really appreciate it, and great questions, and we will get back to you. So thank you. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I see it is 10 o'clock, and so we will go ahead and begin the next session. I really do appreciate everyone being on for this entire discussion this morning. It's truly an honor to be part of the discussions today. We're having some very important conversations. And I think it's very fitting, and I commend the group, Dean Gilbert and that whole team, for putting together today's schedule, because I think not only are we discussing some very important topics, but the way that it's building upon each other is very intentional and very logical, in that we started off today talking about how we're going to kind of manage ourselves as our managing our time and seeing ourselves as a complete person, doing both our work and our family lives. To do all those things, I definitely appreciate those comments, because I don't think we can segment those things apart from each other, because we are one person in all the different roles. Moving into the conversation about diversity and inclusion, and making sure that we're really focused on that as we're building our teams. And then during this session, I'm excited about the outstanding panel that we have here to talk about how do we manage and lead our teams that we have in our labs and in our projects, both formal and informal. As we go back and look about, why we even spend some time talking about managing teams, managing the folks that are in our labs or on our project teams, whether that be other faculty or graduate students, or those that on campus or across the country, I think it's important that we look at, because people are so important in what we do. Yes, we are scientists and researchers and educators on various content and contexts, but when we look at it, what we do is really based around people. And that's shown in several different ways. Go back and look at the budgets that we have. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but an extremely high percentage of the budgets for all of Ifas and each one of our units is based on people. So we invest in people to make things happen. But then also go back, and if we look at the things that we have where we are celebrating our successes, but also the things that oftentimes give us our biggest challenges, all are all around people. And so hopefully today we're going to be able to share some insights and ideas from a number of individuals that have been successful in this, and they can share the good, the bad, and the ugly about working with their teams and dealing with a lot of the issues that we've talked about already today, and as well as how do we hire, how do we then manage project teams and those sort of things. And so on our panel today, I'm excited to have with us three great faculty that have been very successful in this. We've got Jamie Ellis, and he's a professor in the entomology and nematology department. He and his team conduct research projects on honeybees and beekeeping. They implement extension programs on bee health and beekeeping sustainability, and they teach courses on bees and beekeeping. We're also going to be joined today by Paul Fisher, who's a professor and extension specialist in greenhouse horticulture in the environmental horticulture department. He works on a multi-state projects on greenhouse production and water recycling. He also directs an online extension training program for growers. So there's a lot of people involved in that as well. And our panel is rounded out today by Antonio Fasciola. He's an assistant professor in the animal sciences department. The overarching goal of his program is to improve the efficiency of nutrient utilization in dairy cows to enhance production and minimize its environmental impact. So I'm so excited that they're all able to join us today. And so we're going to ask Jamie to kind of get us kicked off today with a few comments, and then we'll go to Paul and then Antonio, and then we'll open it up for questions from there. So Dr. Ellis.
Thanks, Brian. I hope everyone can hear me well. I'm going to be pretty lame here, and I'm going to share my screen because I've developed a bullet point list of some things that I think that are somewhat important, at least for me, for leadership purposes. I will say that being a leader in a lab, the thing that has helped me the most is actually all the mistakes that I have made over the years. Not really nearly as much my successes, but certainly my mistakes. So it's funny, when Brian asked me to be a part of this, I chuckled a little bit because I think maybe I'm being asked just because I've had large teams over the year, not necessarily because I'm a good leader, but nevertheless, I'm going to share some things that have actually worked for me, things that I've considered. And I think the extension person's coming out in me to have this PowerPoint to share with you. Hopefully it's useful. All right. So the very first thing that I found useful for me in leading a lab is having a vision for the lab, knowing where I want to go and what I want to do. Some years ago, I think around 2013 or so, I actually developed a laboratory mission statement. It's 4 or so paragraphs. The first paragraph's an introductory statement to what the lab does, what its overall purpose is. And then I have all 3 of the land grant missions have their own paragraphs with regard, and in those paragraphs, I'll list the goals for those missions. So, you know, I have my research priorities, I have my instructional priorities, and my extension priorities. And this mission statement has really been a really good defining roadmap for me and my team moving forward. There's no ambiguity with what we want to accomplish. We know exactly what we want to do. We try to live by it, and it's really helped me a lot. So leadership for me starts with knowing where I want to go, where I want to take us. Secondly, I do my best to lead by example. I have a long history with working in bee research laboratories as an undergraduate student. I worked for 4 years at the University of Georgia Bee Research Laboratory, and I did as an undergraduate what I expect my team, you know, to do now, washing test tubes and all of that stuff. So furthermore, if I expect them to produce good work and to be on time to work, I want myself to be on time and to do good work. So I try to hold myself to a really high standard so that those working for me or with me can hopefully see that as an example and follow. I am not so great at this one, but I certainly recognize the importance of clearly communicating my expectations. As a leader, there can't be ambiguity. And my sneaky suspicion is if you polled the people who work for me, they would argue that this is one of the things that I'm perhaps worse at, but nevertheless, it's something that I recognize as a deficiency and want to improve. But it is incredibly important to communicate exactly what you want so that there's no, you know, confusion over expectations for those individuals who are being led by you in the lab. You need to fix problems, or sorry, I need to borrow some Ifas terms. I mean, address opportunities for improvement early. Some of my biggest personnel issues over the years have come when I've seen things unraveling early and tried to stick Band-Aids on it to try to address for weeks or months, or then I'll say, look, you can't deal with it at this point. This person's grant funded. And, you know, if I deal with this now, then, you know, I'll lose a year of project. But we as leaders have got to do that. We've got to remember our goals, our mission statements, our purpose, and we have to manage towards those. So we need to address opportunities for improvement among our staff and our team members early. We need to meet regularly. I find this very beneficial. About 5 or so years ago, I'm just guessing here, my team and I decided to start doing breakfast meetings. So once a week, every semester the day changes, but once a week, my team and I will meet at 7:30, from 7:30 until 9:30 at a local restaurant. I'm not going to tell you which one we go to because I don't want y'all to take my good table that can actually seat my team. But nevertheless, we meet weekly for breakfast. And at that breakfast meeting, we just chat about research. We chat about teaching. We chat about extension. A lot of the projects that we do ultimately are born at the table in that particular restaurant. And it really is helpful. It builds camaraderie. It builds common purpose and common vision and common goal. And frankly, it's just a fun time to hang out together and appreciate the people who work for me as people and not just as people who are your employees. This is one of the things that I've grown to appreciate the older I get. It's to consider the professional and personal goals of others and trying to avoid that me first attitude. Now, I want you to think very critically about this for a second. Academia, and I hate to say this because I'm admitting the faults of the system to which we subscribe, but academia is built on the me first attitude. I've got to impress my administrators. I've got to compete for grants. I've got to compete for papers. I've got to compete for students. And you've got to do this to get tenure. You've got to do this to get promotion. You've got to do this to win awards. And that really almost always breeds a me first attitude. But if you remember, you know, my lab has been as big as 30 people. And all the other 29 people in the lab have goals and visions too, right? And as a leader, it's our responsibility to help them achieve their professional and personal goals. So, you know, maybe I'm able to say this because I'm a full professor now and I'm not having to claw my way to the top, but certainly as I reflect back, I look and say, you know, there are actual people with whom I am working, and they also have goals. And as a leader, it's my job to try to help them meet those goals. And I can do that by avoiding the me first attitude. One way to do that is to be leadable. I don't know if my department chairs have noticed over the years, and perhaps they have or haven't, but I try very hard when we do our evaluations every year, my evaluation every year, I try to listen to what they say I need to do, and then I try to go and do that. You know, if I expect to lead others, I have to have the ability to be led myself. So when my administrators ask me to do stuff, I try to do it, even if I don't like it or if I don't want to, you know, demonstrating humility. And kind of this next point that's a little out of order here, this servant leadership is useful when you have leadership. So what is a servant leader? Well, you know, I don't think we can be fully servant leaders, because servant leaders' only goal in life is to serve, you know. And in reality, it's also part of our goals as lab leaders or project leaders or team leaders to advance the projects or the team or the lab. So you've got to have that healthy mix of this vision where you're taking your lab or your team or your project, as well as servant leadership where you're also wanting to bask in the successes of those people with whom you are working. And all of that, you know, those last 3 bullet points really kind of come together. You know, considering the professional, personal goals of others, being a servant leader, and being yourself leadable. Something that is also becoming increasingly important to me as I age is a commitment to lifelong learning. I truly take a lot out of things like the research forum. When I was a new faculty member and I did that new faculty training, I remembered everything they said. I wrote it down, and then I tried to do it. Right. And so leadership learning opportunities are great. I've not been a part of Lead Ifas. I hope to, in fact, soon. I really want to become a better leader. The older I get and the less it's about me, the more I realize that there's lots of great opportunities to learn how to lead. You know, this panel hopefully is one of those for you. And last, kind of at the laboratory level, before I quickly go through a second list of bullets and turn it over to my panelist colleagues, is to teach exceptionalism, expect exceptionalism, and be exceptional. You know, our university preaches excellence. We want to be in the top 5, but I want to take it personally for me a step further. I don't want to be excellent. I don't want to be great. I want to be exceptional. And exceptional doesn't mean that you're competing with others. I need more papers than you, or grants than you, or awards than you. Exceptionalism to me is about being the absolute best you can be. For me, it's about being the absolute best I can be. It's not a competition. The only competition is with myself. So if I'm going to write a paper, I might as well write it the best I can. And I want my employees and my students and my postdocs and my colleagues to have that expectation of themselves as well. And I'm going to briefly go through these other things because I want to make sure I have ample time for my panelist colleagues. But that was kind of the way I think about lab leadership. I'm also on a lot of project teams, and the other panelists here are going to spend more time about that. But I just wanted to say a few things about this. Number one, you know, if you're going to be a project team leader and expect to do a good job, you have to be part of a large team or maybe 5 before you end up leading one. I listen to a financial podcast pretty regularly. Clark Howard, maybe some of you guys have heard of him. And he talks, a lot of people call into the show and want to purchase franchises, you know, Chick-fil-A or Zaxby's or what have you. And he's always like, look, before you purchase those things, you need to work in one for 3 years so that you can learn the ins and outs. So I think that's sage advice. I think before you are a project team leader of a big project team, you need to be a part of one in a servant capacity for or more than one, so that you can learn what it takes to lead at those big national or even international levels. Experience is a great teacher. So create opportunities to lead, especially smaller opportunities. When I first got to UF, I created a lot of small groups to address certain like extension things or research things. And leading small groups made me more comfortable leading larger groups. So create those opportunities if they don't otherwise come to you. You need to not expect everyone to contribute equally, and you have to be ready to pick up the slack. That's one of the tough parts about being a leader, is that the show must go on. And if you're the leader, the buck stops with you. So you need to be ready to pick up the reins if you have to. I would also recommend that you limit your leadership participation to a few impactful teams so that you're not stretched too thin and you can lead appropriately the teams that you have been given. Find good collaborators and support a good cause. That makes leadership fun. It makes it worth, waking up in the morning and doing. And I had a colleague tell me years ago about this good collaborator thing. I don't know if you've been on this panel from the beginning, but early this morning, I believe it was Jose who mentioned you've got to find good colleagues because that can make or break a team. So find good collaborators, individuals who are enthusiastic, will pull their own weight, and on whom you can trust. And that kind of my last point before I yield the floor is that once you have these opportunities and engage in these things, you want to hire and trust good people and delegate responsibilities to them. And I'll give you one small story as an example. About 10 years ago, I was hired as the honeybee specialist, but about 10 years ago, we didn't really have a lot of native bee research going on in the department. And there was a lot of native bee stuff popping up, and that's certainly not my specialty. So I hired a string of postdocs who essentially ran a lab within my lab, and they led the native bee work, on my behalf in the lab. And it was finding and hiring those right people to lead those tasks and delegating responsibilities to them that paid big dividends. So those are kind of my bullet points, and I'm yielding the floor, Brian, to the next panelist.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. I appreciate your comments there. Great stuff to get the conversation started. I'm sure we're going to have some great questions. So if you got questions, keep putting those in the Q&A section to go from there. Paul, why don't you go ahead and share some of your thoughts with us, if you would, please.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay. Are you seeing my screen there, Brian?
Yes, sir.
All right. Great. Okay, so I'm going to talk about working with lots of different players, both across universities, within UF, and also in industry. And, it's interesting listening to Jamie when I'm not in my usual work office right now. I'm in environmental horticulture in Fifield Hall. I have a research extension appointment for greenhouse horticulture. And on my wall, I put up a whole bunch of kind of marketing, business, management guidelines. And I think Jamie is kind of the same as we can learn a tremendous amount from just the way of working advice that we get from business experts. And one of those things that I have on my wall are the key elements of a great network, because it doesn't happen by accident. And I really enjoy personally these challenges of getting teams together. So if you don't have these elements, you're not going to have a team that's functional. So we need trust. That's absolutely fundamental. So you need to have colleagues and companies that are going to share information and are going to be ethical, and you're not going to be thrown under the bus in some compromising way. We need a purpose. We need some mission that really means that there's a good reason that we're going to prioritize this over so many other things that we're working on. We need people who are able to give as well as receive. You've got to get as much or more out of this team as you're willing to contribute. We need some kind of follow-up, some kind of process and a structure there, and return on investment. And return on investment can mean different things to different players within that team. And it's really important within a team to figure out what are the measures of success for these different partners. It might be publications for an assistant professor. It might be being recognized as a sponsor in a YouTube video for an industry member, and so on. But you've got to have these elements together. And I'm going to give an example. I work on several teams. One of them is an industry university consortium called the Floriculture Research Alliance. And we all have such different programs within Ifas. That's one of our great strengths, is our diversity. But I'll just give you an example, because it's a challenging team. It's got lots of moving parts. It has 5 universities plus USDA. We've got a USDA grant there. We have 32 companies that we're working with as well. The reason that this works as a university research team, where we're focused on production issues for growing flower and other edible crops and greenhouses is that we know each other. There are individuals within all of these institutions that you know, we've known each other for many years, and we all bring complementary skills. And so sometimes when we're putting together these multi-state grant applications where, oh, we need to have a sociologist on our team or something to check off the box in terms of passing review and getting that grant, that's not enough to have an effective team. And one of the other things about us as a group of researchers is we have a shared culture in terms of the way that our way of working, our perspective, and we all learned, basically we were trained to start with grower problems and really try to come up with solutions, and that was our role. As opposed to developing solutions and then look for a problem, which is way too often the way that research works. And one of the nice things is, you know, another really good thing about teams is if you've got a grant that glues everybody together, money, a little bit of money can go a long way. And I really compliment the Ifas Extension, the Ifas Extension Research Administration in terms of these seeded grants, for example, getting teams working together. So I like working with industry. I love going out to visit growers and so on. And when I'm trying to work with industry sponsorship of research, I like to have multiple competing supporters. And you know, I'm calling this the NASCAR model. And so we have this made up term that we use, which is co-opetition, that we have industry partners who are competitors in the marketplace, but they can collaborate and cooperate when it comes to certain types of team activities and working together, for example, on research for solutions. And what I'd like to do is to have multiple partners who are all giving moderate donations, as opposed to a small number of partners where there's a very high expectation in terms of intellectual property, and it takes us away from the freedom of being able to do projects that are going to be impactful industry-wide. And one of the things that I've certainly really learned over and over again is that we all value what we pay for. And as an extension person, I'll take the online courses that I teach, for example. We charge somewhere around $200 for our participants to enroll in a 4-week online course. And our completion rate is somewhere around 80%. Our poorest completion rate is where we give away enrollments into these courses. So a little bit of money means that we've got very motivated partners here. And you know, what we're doing in this particular case, the details don't really matter, but we've got a research extension program, we've got graduate student and undergraduate research work, we have all of the usual extension kind of outlets that you have. But a really important part of this as a team is that we do get together each year. And we have, because these partners, in this particular case, this Floriculture Research Alliance group, all of these partners are contributing $5,000 to $10,000 a piece. So when we come to discuss our research work and get feedback, they are very motivated to tell us whether we're going completely off track and in our ivory tower or not. And also we can start to see trends about if multiple partners are all facing the same issue, that's a good sign that that's something we should work on. So I take this approach personally when I'm looking at setting up a program in a new area. Right now, for example, with COVID-19, there is a tremendous amount of interest in growing plants indoors or in containers. We're all wanting to kind of hunker down and grow some of our own food. So we're now looking at, along with my colleague Selena Gomez, we're going out to breeders and saying, okay, is there, here's an opportunity, this is an emerging issue here or a market opportunity. Can we get you all together to not only provide funding, but also provide some intellectual input? And you know, we're all encouraged to be entrepreneurial, but what does that really mean? And when it comes to working with teams with industry partners, a lot of that is thinking about what is the value added proposition? What are you going to provide that is going to improve the success of that partner? And how can you provide a return on investment without causing a conflict of interest? And so if you go down this kind of path, then you know that you're going to need to resolve potential conflicts, and you're always looking at how do we add value, but we're adding value at the level of helping society as a whole and getting our publications. So we really need to look at it from the point of view of our industry partners. What are they looking for in a partnership? Could be networking, acknowledgement and exposure, and then it's critical that they understand how they can be associated with our excellent brand of Ifas. They want to help set priorities. They want to be involved in research. And there are also many industry partners aren't just out for a quick return, but they're actually really willing to invest in the next generation of leaders with students. But there are a lot of challenges when we work with industry, and there's a lot of potential pitfalls. And I think this is especially true when you're an assistant professor and you're starting out and you don't have a wide network. And a company comes, for example, and says, okay, I want to plonk down $50,000 on a project. And you've really got to question, okay, am I going to get a really good quality refereed publication out of that? So many companies are going to want short-term benefits. Research tends to be long-term. If they need to understand the difference between a donation as a gift, where we are absolutely driving our research priorities, we're getting input from them, and a difference with that versus something with intellectual property protection, which requires a research contract. Different companies have got different cultures, and some of them just aren't good at playing together in the sandbox, and those are the ones to avoid. All research that we do needs to aim towards publication. Sometimes when you're early in your career, you might take on industry funding to just pay the bills and get your lab set up. But hopefully you can quickly transition out of that phase so that really you're able to focus on the research work. There is potential bias towards the products and so on that those companies are delivering, and industry funding is real money. And so they expect some return. Things go wrong, COVID closes things down. Okay, sorry, we're gonna have to eat that, and we're gonna redo all of those experiments, which is some of what we're firing up again right now. But if you can manage those potential conflicts of interest and actually enjoy them and build your skills in terms of managing teams, there's a lot of good things about working with industry partners and working across colleagues. One of the things is that it gives us focus, and we can develop a clear identity. We get excellent stakeholder feedback, especially if they're buying in. We have very motivated partners. We've got well-trained students, such as these two graduate students, one of whom's now running a research institute, private, and another's a faculty member who just got tenure. And when you set these teams up in a right way, where it's win-win for everybody, then you've got steady funding. And so the particular project that I've mentioned here, for example, it's been going for 16 years. And every year that's somewhere around $150,000 to $200,000 coming into the program. That gives a lot of stability in terms of applying for grants. So I know that's a very specific case just based on what I'm having to do on my program, but hopefully there's one or two lessons to draw from it.
Great, thanks, Paul. I really appreciate you sharing your experience with that successful project, and there's a lot of things there that we can pull from there. So Antonio, why don't you share some of your thoughts with us, please?
All right, thank you, Brian. I'm really honored to be in this panel as being the only assistant professor here among two heavy hitters. So thank you. I'm also a little intimidated, but and I also don't have a PowerPoint presentation. I have my points here that I wanna share as far as leading my team. So first, I want to say that this is just my experience as an assistant professor. It doesn't mean that other styles of leadership do not work. I've come across to meet many different types of leaders, and I think many different styles can be very effectively. So also the comments I'm making are not based on peer review literature, but mostly on my experience, although I read about leadership. So I think the first thing I want to mention to the audience is that for the most part, or many times, we as academics are not trained to be leaders. And I'm really glad to see that Ifas, different departments, different colleges have many opportunities. So I really think it's a great thing, even for young faculty like myself, to get trained in leadership. I remember I was talking to my wife one day and I said something like, you know, after I get tenured, I'll start to work on leadership. And she was really mad because if you are an effective leader, that can improve so much your productivity, your achievements as a young faculty. So I really encourage other young faculty to pursue those opportunities. I think when I think about mentoring, I think there's two very important preconditions to that, and some of them were already mentioned by James and Paul. And I think one is having a genuine interest in developing people. So we are working with people. Again, many times we're not trained as leaders. We select faculty who were very productive grad students, who had, you know, really good output as students. That doesn't mean that they are going to be great leaders. So have a genuine interest, and then we become, you know, leaders and administrators within our own group. So have a genuine interest goes a long ways, in my opinion. Also, I think Jane pointed that empower them to achieve their goals. So my students, I'm not trying to clone them into future me. So I really want them to become what they really want to become. And that's where I find very difficult to have one specific goal for the lab, because each student will have their own goals. So we try to work with each student. For example, I had students with a deep interest in microbiology. And, you know, I really try to let them kind of take off and find their own wings to pursue their dreams. I also had students interested in mathematical modeling or in cell culture. And of course, I'm not an expert in every single aspect of that. So I really let them pursue their dreams, and I see myself as a mediator to give them the conditions to do that. So I think when I think about mentoring my group, I think the one main component is going to be recruiting top people to be in my group. And usually I look for highly motivated students, as I think some of you may think about in grad school. I think the tendency is that as you move along, you lose some of that excitement. So if you start off with students who are not very excited, in my opinion, it really doesn't go, doesn't go very well later on. I also think that communication, as Jamie was pointing out, and Paul, communication is very important. I've developed a mentoring compact when I started in 2014, 13 or 14. And I meet with my students once a week individually. I meet with them as a group. I have a big group. I think I have 8 grad students. I have 6 TAs that I meet frequently. I teach a large class. I also have visiting students and undergrad research assistants in the lab. So it's really quite a challenge to meet on a one-on-one basis, but I do my best to do that. Lab meetings once a week, and also frequently check. So what I do is, if I have a moment that I'm not being particularly super productive, I go and check on my students. I chat a little bit. I go to the lab on a daily basis to check how things are going. And I think it really makes them feel supported, makes them feel that I care about them and about their work. Also, in my lab, we have a culture of teamwork. And I feel like it's very important to support that culture and to let students know that they are part of a team. I think a big part of managing people is managing their egos and internal conflicts in the lab. Most students, when they come to my lab, they're high achievers in their own, previous experience. And once they come to the lab, they become average instantly because they're all very good. So I think it's very important not to play favorites. I remember my advisor and I had a very good relationship, and I had colleagues in my lab that kind of disliked that thing. So I try to be as fair as possible with everyone in the lab. Also, avoid as much as possible to divide students or to create unnecessary competition. Who is the best, who's publishing more, or who is giving the best seminar, things like that. I think it can easily become very toxic. Also, I want to say that I think it's very important to give them credit, to promote good work, to highlight the positivity of their work. I work a lot on social media, and I think it's a great platform to promote your students' success. They feel like you care about them, you care about how good they're doing. Also, you're helping them with your own network. You're helping them to move on in their career. Celebrate their victories. Every paper published, it may not matter if you are a full professor and have hundreds of papers, but for that particular student, maybe their first paper or their second paper. So make sure you celebrate that.
The next
Seminars,
is the
scientific
functional
presentations.
and value orientations. These value orientations
I'm hearing
are
some.
5 universal questions that are.
I'm hearing some. Okay, good. Thank you. Be a good listener. Again, I think my wife may not agree that I'm a good listener, but I try to listen to my students. Be very explicit in your conversations with them. Let them know what you are expecting. In terms of good, difficult conversations, I think it's very important to be proactive and do not wait until problems escalate. I will emphasize to be kind, refrain from making decisions in the heat of the moment, take time to ruminate, try to listen multiple viewpoints. If there's a conflict in the lab, be very honest about your expectations and also have reasonable expectations. My students, they are not my peers. They don't have the experience that I have, even though I'm still young. So I don't expect them to write papers as I do or to do experiments as I used to do. So I think that's very important. And just to finish off, because I want to keep within the 10 minutes that Brian told me, have goals that are very specific to each student. They're measurable, achievable, those SMART goals. I think time bound. I create deadlines with my students, and I think they really feel that they are part of a group and that I care. I don't remember if I mentioned that, but one thing that I do celebrate with besides papers, I really like Jamie's suggestion of going for a breakfast, but we do celebrate all the students' birthdays. I have a spreadsheet with everyone's birthday, and we celebrate that. When we go to conference, we go out for dinner or other gatherings, and we have, if it's appropriate, we'll have a beer or something. I think it's very important to create that environment. A lot of students, they don't have their family around, so the lab becomes kind of a family. Especially international students, they don't have a network here in the US. So I think it's very important to go, way out of your comfort zone if it's needed, to make sure they feel part of the group. The last thing I want to mention is that I try to find role models as leaders, and that can be in my department, it can be in the college, in the university, but also outside. So I try to talk and to read about companies, how they treat people and how they manage people. And I would encourage others to think outside the box too, and look elsewhere for great role models. All right, thank you. And I'll be happy to address any questions in the discussion.
Appreciate everybody's comments there. We've got about 10 minutes left for questions, and keep those coming here in the Q&A. One of the things that I want to pose first for the group, and we'll see who wants to address it first. You know, as researchers, so many times we spend hours upon hours researching the best flux capacitor or whatever we got to buy for our lab, or the next piece of equipment that we need. But a lot of times we don't always really focus on what we talk about was the most important aspect of our group, or the people. So maybe can you all share some things that you do to be intentional in the hiring of the right people for your lab, both staff and graduate students, and then maybe some things that you do to onboard them to make them successful and really feel part of that culture that you all have built in your labs and in the teams that you're leading. So I don't know who wants to address that first.
I can make a couple comments. I'll say, as far as recruiting, for example, I try to recruit widely and aggressively. Again, social media is a great place to recruit and to promote the work you do. I usually have many applicants for positions. I also have my students helping me in the process of selecting who are going to be, the person working with them. And I try to have a very diverse, as diverse as possible, try to avoid having 5 Brazilians in my group or things like that, because I'm originally from Brazil. So I think that's very important. And in terms of investment, one tip that I would give to other young faculties is invest as much as you can in talent people, in people, because there's so many resources that you can share with other faculty in terms of equipment and facilities. So invest in people, I think it's a very good way to have a productive group.
Sorry, Brian, I just got kicked out of Zoom. Difficult thing. At the point that I was leaving, you were just asking about hiring, and I would just say 2 things that I've learned. One of them is was very good advice that I received, which was, when you're hiring, go with your doubts. So your gut is an extremely good filter, and it's rarely wrong. And the other is, be very careful about adopting orphans. So if somebody has not succeeded in another program, just be careful. We sometimes think, oh well, I'm such a great manager, I can get this back on track. But quite often, there's an underlying reason there why somebody is needed to drop out of a different program.
Just to add to that, Paul, I think that was just spot on. Almost every time I feel like I've had personnel issues, I felt like in my gut at the hiring time that it probably wasn't the right hire, but a colleague was saying, oh, this person did well here, et cetera. And then when I brought them on, I was like, oh, you should have just trusted your gut. And the predicament about hiring, and I kind of alluded to it a little bit. Imagine you've got a 2-year grant and you're 1 year into that grant. And if you make a personnel change, it's months to advertise and recruit. It may be months to move down, but to get you've lost a good chunk of time. So you've really got to do your homework. When I was reading leadership books early on, before becoming a lab leader, they all mention, the one of the most important things that a leader is going to do is invest in the hiring process, the actual time it takes to vet people. Look at their CV, question what they've done, call their contacts, who knows them, and to bring them on. But once you've got them on board, every time I feel like I have someone in my lab, I feel like I have the responsibility now to teach them and lead them. And so actually Brian taught me this, some years ago. about teaching. When students fail, we often say, well, students failed because they didn't try hard enough. But oftentimes student failure is a reflection on my teaching. Perhaps I didn't do enough to help them meet their goals. And so I sometimes take on that burden with my employees. If they're not succeeding, what am I doing to not have front loaded them with what is necessary? So I try hard to let the newcomers to the lab, float amongst everyone in the lab. These breakfasts that we have really have reinforced that community. I encourage training opportunities for them, but even still, sometimes I make boo-boos in the hiring and management process.
One of the questions that came in here, so as what we mentioned, one of the advantages of Ifas is that we do work statewide, and we have folks scattered across the state to do that, and a lot of people in those labs are working around there. So any advice that you all have for maybe some PIs who are at RECs that have students that stay mostly in Gainesville, or when you're a PI and you're located in Gainesville, that you may have a student or a researcher or staff member that's working on REC? How do you help stay in communication and advising and communication with folks that you may not be in the same physical space with, which we're all learning now due to COVID?
I guess I can kick that off. I'm actually one of those people who, especially early in my career, if I didn't see you, I assumed you were doing nothing. So it was very hard for me to allow students to, be away, or postdocs to be away or work remotely. And obviously this last 3 months has nearly killed me because you don't know with certainty what's going on. But early, even during COVID now, I ask people to email me on Monday what their goals are for this week and and did they meet the goals from last week. And on Friday, we revisit those things. People work distance. I mean, I've got a research, teaching, and extension series of appointments. And so my people are going to be away from me. So clear goals. I like to document that through email. So I have it on paper, check in with them at the end of the week. Did you meet these goals? And it's that, old debate between, how much time does it take to do the tasks that they say that they're going to put on paper. I always look at someone's paper and say, gosh, I could have done that in the morning. Why is it taking you a week to do it? So, kind of balancing that perspective as well. But certainly they need to let you know what they plan to do, and you kind of need to hold them accountable in many ways to it. But otherwise, hire good people and trust that they're behaving till you know otherwise.
Well, sorry, go ahead, Brian.
Go ahead, Paul. Wrap us up. Last comment, then we'll wrap us up here.
Well, I would just say that one of the great things about Ifas is we've got an amazing group of colleagues. And if you're off the main campus, as an assistant professor especially, really reach out, put the time investment in to find partners on the main campus that you can trust. That's number one. More important, and is going to deliver. More important than their technical area of expertise, so they can be that support network for you on the main campus.
Great. That really wraps it up. Thanks to all of you. I have a page full of notes here. I think Jamie hit on something there at the end that for all of us, and this really kind of came in as we went to this whole COVID thing, is the difference between checking in and checking up on somebody. Nobody wants to be checked up on, but everybody wants to be checked in on to make sure they're connected, to see how things are going. And you really all talk about building that culture. And hopefully the big kind of takeaway from all this, with all of us that we're building and leading teams, whether that be our lab groups or other faculty colleagues, maybe across the state or across the country or across the world, is really kind of focusing on that culture and that trust that you have with each other. And I really want to point out something that Jamie said at the very beginning that kind of weaved its way through all of your conversations, was your team or your group has to have a very clear vision or purpose that everybody buys into. And I want to encourage you, I think that's something that I've learned, to make sure that in the hiring process, you share with the folks that you're interviewing, that you're hiring with, that this is the vision and the purpose of this group, so you know what you're signing up for. These are the expectations. This is the culture. This is how we operate. And to make those things happen. And it always boils down to communication. All of us continue to communicate. One piece of advice I got was, whenever you think you've over communicated something, communicate it some more, to go through it and make sure that there's always that open communication with folks. Be intentional, invest in your people. And I think that's the big thing, is we need to make sure that we're investing time in the hiring and onboarding and in the progression of the folks we work with, other faculty on our teams, staff, graduate students. The number of times people have large labs, they always go about the importance of their lead staff person, whether it's a biologist or other scientist or whatever that is, it helps manage their lab, and how important it is that they're investing in there. And I think at the end of that, when you're investing in people, one of the things to really look at is invest in the whole person. Understand and see that student not just as another cog in the wheel of your lab or of your group, but really invest in them as a person to help them develop to do those things. So thank you all very much. Jamie, Paul, Antonio, I really appreciate your comments. I hope everybody else got a lot out of it as well. I know that I did. I appreciate each of you investing your time in being part of this panel. So looking at that, I see that our time has expired for the day. And I really appreciate everyone being part of this conversation. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much for pulling this together, Brian.
Thank you.
Okay, it's 8 o'clock. Are we ready to start?
Yeah, also 11 o'clock in Florida time.
Sorry. Yeah, that was a total slip. Sorry. Yes, I'm in Florida, or I'm in Oregon, so it's 8 o'clock for me. Okay, so our next session is about faculty mentoring. So Rob and I are co-moderating this session, and I'm going to start by introducing our panelists. So first we will have Dr. Lisa Lundy. She is an associate professor and teaches agricultural communication in the Department of Agricultural Education and Communication. She serves as the undergraduate coordinator for the department. From 2004 to 2015, she was a faculty member at Louisiana State University in the Manship School of Mass Communication. She was an SEC Academic Leadership Fellow 2011 to 2012. She is chair-elect of the Ifas Faculty Assembly, and this last year served as the chair of the Professional Welfare Committee on the Ifas Faculty Assembly. As such, she developed or helped develop a set of guidelines for faculty mentoring in Ifas. And she's going to share those guidelines and some best practices for faculty mentoring. Next, after Lisa, we will have Dr. Christine Miller. She's an associate professor of evolutionary ecology in the entomology and nematology department. In the past 2 years, she's been involved in running the Weaving the Future of Animal Behavior, which is a series of multi-day workshops and symposia that are directed at new faculty and late-stage postdocs in the field of animal behavior science. Major areas of emphasis include promoting diversity, providing guidance, and developing mentoring relationships, including peer mentoring groups that continue for months and even years beyond the workshops. Dr. Miller is also helping out with the new UF CALS Mentoring Academy. And then Rob is also going to speak. He is professor of landscape ecology within Wildlife Ecology and Conservation Department. He received a UF Doctoral Dissertation Advisor Mentor Award in 2017 and the CALS Graduate Teacher Mentor Advisor of the Year in 2016. As he's grown his mentoring strategy for graduate students, he has increasingly extended his strategies to new faculty as well. He implements these approaches by serving as a chair of several faculty mentoring committees within his department and also in more informal mechanisms. And our last panelist is Dr. Miguel Acevedo. He's an assistant professor of quantitative population ecology in wildlife ecology and conservation. Prior to his position at UF, he was an assistant professor of quantitative ecology at the University of Puerto Rico. And so as such, he has mentee experience from 2 different institutions. He's also had some great mentors in his career, including Rob Fletcher, who was his PhD advisor. So if you want to start, Dr. Lundy.
Okay, so I'm just going to share briefly about the guidelines that we developed. The deans asked us to take a look as the Professional Welfare Committee for Faculty Assembly and see if we could come up with some guidelines to try to help have some consistency in faculty mentoring across Ifas. And so that's what we did. And we have a full set of guidelines that I'm going to share here in the chat that's posted on the Ifas HR website. So you can look at those, you know, when it's convenient for you. But I'm going to just share a couple of slides to go over some of the highlights. Let's see. All right, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see those? All right. So one thing that was a highlight for our group about faculty mentoring is that it's really important to begin the process of faculty mentoring right at the point of hiring. And as new faculty are going through the onboarding process, it's important for them to have mentors as early in that process as possible. We also, in looking at a lot of different resources about faculty mentoring, recommended that it's important for mentees and mentors to play a role in choosing their mentoring relationships. They may have an idea of exactly what they're looking for in a mentor, or what kind of aspects of their job they're most needing mentoring on. So giving them some way to have some input into that process of who their mentors might be. Along those lines, a lot of what we read and looked at about faculty mentoring really recommended mentoring teams or committees as preferable to just having a single mentor. So at least 2 members, 3 is preferred in a lot of what we read. But having a couple of people maybe at different career stages or different specializations within the department, or different appointments within the department who can speak into that faculty member's journey, is we saw that over and over again in the different resources we looked at. Because we have so many faculty in Ifas that are in different locations, we also recommended that as chairs and directors and unit leaders think about creating mentoring relationships and pairing people together, that you think about having somebody who's in the place where that faculty member is working, so they can have face-to-face conversations, but also thinking about maybe having somebody who's in their department, but maybe in a different location, maybe in Gainesville. So thinking about having people who can who that person can relate to on a face-to-face basis is important. We also recommended frequent interaction, and that's going to look different for every faculty member, and they may have different desires for how frequently they interact with their committee, but giving people the opportunity to have as frequent of interaction formally and informally as is helpful to them. And then having a formal review process that takes place at least once a year, so that most of us are writing annual reports, or we're updating our CV, or we're updating our promotion and tenure document, giving the mentor committee the opportunity to give some feedback to that, and to help just share their thoughts on what that person is creating each year. Administrative support on all the resources that we saw is really important, that good mentorship is recognized and encouraged. The expectations for mentorship are clarified and communicated to faculty as they engage in that relationship, and that there's really a commitment at the leadership level to mentoring. And also that encouragement and that engagement is more focused on supporting and reinforcing mentoring versus monitoring and assessment. I think Brian actually alluded to this in the last session, that people don't necessarily want to be checked up on, but people feel good about being checked in on. So kind of thinking about those 2 different approaches. I added this slide when I was talking about mentoring with another group, that I think it's really important where we are right now to be actively engaging in mentoring relationships. Everybody's job looks different than it did 6 months ago. So making sure that you're checking in with mentees, and formally and informally, and just offering people the chance to process what they're going through and have somebody to talk to about what they're going through. It's important to be really honing in on that at times like this. Yeah, so if you have any questions as you look through that more in-depth document, it's really just a page because we wanted it to be something that was used by people, but I'm happy to answer any questions about that or the process that we went through.
Thanks, Lisa. Dr. Miller, if you would like to go next, what we'll do is we'll have each of you speak, and then we'll have questions once you've all had a chance to talk.
Great, well, thank you. Yeah, it's wonderful to be here. I'm really passionate about mentoring, and I'm going to share my screen here in a couple of slides. Okay, So I want to start with the concept that good mentorship benefits all of us. And I think there's been, there's been a lot of discussion about, I think over the years, we all know that mentoring is necessary for students and for postdocs. And it's wonderful to see some structure put in place to make sure early faculty get good mentorship. But it doesn't just end there. And I don't know about some of you, but when I got tenure, I thought, what am I going to do with my life now? What are my career priorities? What shape can this take? And that was a key time to find some mentoring myself. But of course, it doesn't end there. I think a lot of us encounter all sorts of interesting challenges in our day-to-day work life. And it's so useful to have people we can reach out to, both peer mentors and senior mentors. So good mentorship is really something for all of us. And I wanted to kind of take this broader philosophical view and kind of get at some practical help too for all of you, but also ideas that maybe you can pass on to your mentees, whether they're faculty, postdocs, or students. And one of those that I'll get to is a concept of the mentoring map. Now, as Shirley mentioned, I've been fortunate to be able to help out with some mentoring efforts, and one of them was sponsored by the Animal Behavior Society and the National Science Foundation. In the case of the picture you see here, we were able to whisk away these early faculty members from institutions all over the United States, some postdocs as well, and bring them to Arizona and have multiple days of intensive mentoring on professional development in a wide range of topics, really building a community. And this kind of reinforced for me that, yes, we need mentoring within our departments, within our locations. That's really important. Also, though, is important to seek out mentors. And this becomes often more informal, but seeking out mentors from other institutions. And that's, and we can often get those through our scientific societies, teaching societies, our networks of people that we work with. And so that's something I think that we can all encourage, because I think a fundamental concept is something that Lisa brought up. There's not a single mentor out there that will solve all our problems and help us with all of our challenges. We really need a community of mentors, and from a diversity of, locations, career stages, and so forth. So the concept of the mentoring map was something I learned about, even though I was a panelist serving for that workshop I just showed you. Of course, I benefited a lot from it myself, and I wanted to share with you this idea of a mentoring map. So what are your mentoring needs? And of course, you can think about this too as what, as ideas to pass on to your mentees. What are their mentoring needs? Well, mentorship isn't just one thing, right? Many of us think of maybe mentorship as people who give us opportunities or help us solve our problems. But of course, it's much broader than that. And here are some of the categories that, just as examples of where we need mentoring. Maybe you need someone to give you really honest feedback on that grant proposal. Perhaps you need sponsorship. And that's basically what that means is a person out there that when they see an award that you might fit, they think, aha, and they help connect people with opportunities. Honorifics. It was great to hear David Reed talk about UF's efforts in those regards at the last Ifas Research Forum. You may need some access to opportunities, accountability. This idea of safe space, counter space, I think is an important one, because many of us, we have lives outside of our work and identities, and sometimes there's a bit of, sometimes they're not just fitting too well, and we need someone we can talk to, or we can be open about our challenges that may stretch beyond work. And that might not be the mentor that you would go to for honest feedback or sponsorship or problem solving, for example. So we really need this community. And so when we share this, what we do then, and I don't have time today, but we encourage people then to take 5 minutes and look at this, basically build this mentoring map. They may have an additional category up in that upper right-hand corner, some other aspect of mentoring that you don't see there. And then write in, who do you go to when you need sponsorship, intellectual community, professional development? And I know I did this exercise and I realized that there were gaps. I'm not getting all the mentoring I need. And so then the question is how to do so. And again, some of it may be obvious. Oh, I should reach out to this person. They would love to help me. But sometimes it might not be so obvious. And that's where, people are like, well, how do I find a mentor? And we could talk about that for a long time. And I think one thing that's important for us to know, as well as to pass on to our mentees, is that you can, it's not too much to ask someone for a mentoring moment for 5 minutes of their time. And I actually did this myself in January. I was at a conference and I went up to a senior researcher in my field that I respect. And I said, yeah, can I have 5 minutes of your time? I'd love a mentoring moment. And that was a really beneficial 5 minutes. And then he sent me follow-up emails. So I've even gotten more advice and developed almost a bigger mentoring relationship from that. So all of us need mentoring. And I think it's important to realize, of course, we're not going to solve all our problems or get everything we need on our own. And neither is, one mentor is not going to be enough. So helping, I think it's good for us to recognize and pass on that idea to mentees, this idea of a mentoring community.
Thank you, Christine. Dr. Fletcher, would you like to go next?
Sure, that was fantastic. So what I wanted to talk about for my time is really kind of honing in on faculty mentor committees and other sort of related mechanisms for it, especially for new faculty to get quality mentorship. So when I first arrived at the University of Florida, I was fortunate to immediately have a faculty mentor committee that was formed. And I had 3 really outstanding faculty on that committee: Emilio Bruna, Madan Oli, and Katie Sieving. And they were each instrumental in their own way to help me navigate the University of Florida and the tenure and promotion process in a way that wasn't obvious at the time. And I think more broadly, there are a lot of benefits for both faculty, senior faculty, to engage in faculty mentoring committees, but also for new faculty to really engage in the process as well. Most IFAS departments require that new faculty have mentor committees, but the way that they're implemented can really influence the overall success of these programs. And I would argue that really, the ultimate goal here is to really foster, accelerate, and elevate new faculty in a way where their programs are really successful, in a way that's both provides short-term success, but really long-term sustainability as well. And what that really requires is a holistic approach to mentoring that can be achieved in part through a mentoring committee, but as Christine mentioned, there's a wide range of mentoring opportunities and sort of mechanisms that are really important throughout your career. So when I first arrived at UF, most of my mental space for mentoring focused on mentoring graduate students. How do I effectively mentor graduate students? And then as I kind of stuck around a bit longer and got tenure and promotion, a lot of my effort is kind of changed in terms of trying to transition to mentoring new faculty. And I think there's really 4 key ways that new faculty can be mentored effectively with a mentoring committee to really try to address issues that maybe otherwise would take some time for new faculty to really gain the needed experience and knowledge to be successful. And the first key issue I think that's really important is for mentoring committees to really unveil the resources and opportunities that are available at the University of Florida. The University of Florida really invests in many ways in its faculty, but for a new faculty member that arrives on campus or an REC, a lot of those opportunities and a lot of those sort of potential mechanisms to help grow a program might not be obvious at all. It certainly was the case for me, where when I first arrived here, I looked to other faculty and thought, how are they running their program in a successful way? What is the sort of ratio of grant funding or contract funding that's helping sort of sustain their program versus other mechanisms? And having a mentor committee can really help, especially in the early days of a new faculty member's programmatic development. It can really help in terms of being effective with their time and energy. And as Lisa mentioned, establishing these committees early on is, I think, really essential to maximize the success of new faculty as they develop their program. So I think that's one key way in which a mentoring committee can be effective. I think a second key issue is to provide a sounding board for how to spend time most effectively. We're all time limited at the end of the day. And what becomes I think what's often unclear is how do you best allocate that time, both for the development of your program, but also for tenure and promotion. And the mentoring committee can act as a real sounding board in terms of how new faculty are currently allocating their time and how to improve time allocation, time management in a way that sort of maximizes success and really makes their program more efficient in the long run. The third thing that I think is really critical for a mentoring committee is to be essentially a means for faculty to understand departmental expectations, service expectations, what is and what isn't expected in the first few years of their position, and to really, in some ways, protect these faculty members so that they can really grow their program and they don't get distracted with other important activities, but perhaps less important than some of the key issues that are really necessary for programmatic development. And then the fourth thing that I think is also quite important is to provide guidance on work-life balance. Work-life balance is essential for long-term sustainability in this field. And it's something that often gets either not communicated well or sort of not communicated in a way early on to give new faculty guidance in terms of how they can juggle having, a family, for example, and also building a lab. And these are challenging things where if you have a good committee, they can provide you with real strategic advice on those issues. So the main reasons why I wanted to bring this up is I think that we all want to be investing in these mentoring opportunities for new faculty. It benefits the department, it benefits Ifas, and it benefits the faculty member in the long run. And hopefully will sort of increase their sustainability and success throughout their career. And so I'll just leave it with that. I can talk more later if there's time about less formal mechanisms for faculty mentoring, but the mentoring committee is an essential step along the way.
Thanks, Rob. Dr. Acevedo, would you like to go next?
Sure. Can everybody hear me okay? All right, so I feel like after a full morning of all these talks, and particularly after Lisa, Christina, and Rob, it seems that everything has been already said. So I'm gonna try to provide kind of like a different perspective, more as a mentee, and the things that have been useful for me. And the take-home message that I want to bring today is that I feel that these mentoring committees are more than for tenure and promotion. The same way that mentoring graduate students, it's way more than just leading them to graduation day. And I want to make a quick exercise and think back on our times when we were grad students. Back then, when life was better, there was no COVID, and think about the tools that you gain in grad school. And then do some fast forwarding to today and think about the skills that you need to succeed in this business. And I had this conversation with way too many of my colleagues, and without having any formal analysis, I will say that grad school prepares you for around 20% of the skills that you need to be successful as faculty. Because it's the first day of faculty and all of a sudden I need to know about mentoring. I need to do some teaching. I need to do leadership, managing people, project management, budget, IACU compliance, HR, purchasing processes, students' mental health, and all these things that we get very, very, very little training when we are in grad school. I was lucky because I had a great PhD mentor that provided me opportunities to train not only in research, but also in some of these things that complement our lives. So that's where the mentoring committee can really, really help us. It's providing us with interpreting the landscape and identifying those resources so we can start complementing those skills that we need to be successful. And in this relationship, the idea is that we go beyond the what to the how. I think we are ready. If we made it this far, I mean, we already know that we need more grants, more papers, and we need to do better at teaching. It doesn't matter how many papers you have, how many grants you have, and how good are you at teaching. We always want to improve. We always want to do better. So, you know, a mentoring committee that tells you, well, you need more papers, you need more grants, or you need to do better at teaching, it's probably going to be redundant with our own self-motivation. But where it's really different and a really good mentoring committee will help you really, really decipher the how and particularly navigate those hidden, unspoken rules in every institution. There's certainly rules in an institution that are not in the faculty manual. And usually faculty that have more experience know what things are important to a particular institution. And when you need to do something, you know, who are the people to contact? You know, if you need to do a purchasing order, if you have a question about IACUC, if you have a question about IRB, who are the key people to talk? That's super useful. I've been super lucky. I have a great mentoring team now here at the University of Florida. It's Bill Pine, Steve Johnson, and Sam Wisely. And in one of our meetings, I was telling them about the way I'm teaching, I'm mentoring my grad students. And I'm sort of changing the way I have done things in the last couple of years. And this was driven by a student. A student brought to me this idea of the 8 dimensions of wellness. And it's this idea of going beyond the life-work balance, right? So in the idea of life-work balance, life and work are 2 different things that you have to sort of balance. But when you're thinking about the 8 dimensions of wellness, you think about those, you know, it's a summary of those 8 things that make us who we are. And life and work at part of those 8 dimensions. And let me just mention them just quickly here. So the 8 dimensions include emotional wellness, spiritual wellness, which it includes, you know, religious values, but it goes beyond to describe more like finding your values and your purpose in life. Intellectual wellness, physical wellness, environmental wellness, financial wellness, occupational wellness, and social wellness. So I'm trying to foster now the mentoring to my students to incorporate those things. So to let them understand that work, it's part of it, right? It's that part of that occupational wellness and maybe that intellectual wellness. But in order to be good at that, we need to be good at other things. We have to have our physical activity. We have to be well emotionally. We have to talk about, you know, environmental wellness, have a good working environment. We have to talk about being social. You know, we have to sleep, we have to eat. And it was very interesting because in that meeting with my mentoring committee, they stopped me right away and they told me, well, that's what you need to do too. You know, whatever you're trying to whatever strategy you're teaching your students, you need to apply that for you too. And that's the last thing I want to share. And I think that's sort of echoing what Rob said, that really good mentoring committees are the ones that really help you, show you the landscape in a way that identifies you as a person more than just somebody that works here. So doing that, understanding you're also a human being, that you have family, that you have other values, that you're a social person, that helps a lot, you know, in this whole process. So the take-home message from my perspective as a mentee is that this mentoring, it's way more than just to get us to tenure and promotion. It's to really, really help us strive and have a long-term resilience academic program. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Miguel. I wanted to mention, before we open it up for questions to our panelists, the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity has a wide variety of resources for faculty on time management, work-life balance, mentoring, all kinds of things. And in fact, Dr. Bonning at our next Ifas Research Forum on July 20th will be leading a session on the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity Programs. So stay tuned for those. Okay, are there questions for our panelists? Please post them in the Q&A. We do have one question about coaching versus mentoring. Is Ifas considering having a coaching program in the future?
So I've never really seen that kind of a coaching program, so I'm not exactly sure what it looks like, but I can tell you as we were working on the guidelines for mentoring that there's a lot of different models that people take for mentoring, and that's one of the reasons why we really encourage the mentoring committee versus the single mentor, because one mentor might take more of a coach approach. And I know what you're asking about is probably much more formal than what I'm describing, but another mentor might be more of a peer or more of an encourager, or more of, like Christine said, somebody who's like an advocate for you and helping you, secure opportunities or recognition. So I'm not sure if that really answers the question, but I'd love to see more about the coaching model. It's just not something I'm familiar with.
Yeah, so in some research that I've done on mentoring, there's a variety of mentoring models. I'm not as familiar with the coaching model, but there's, the traditional sort of mentoring, peer and near peer mentoring, groups, networks, sponsorship. And I think, probably we need all of those people as mentors in our life. So I'm not as familiar with the coaching, but yeah, it's something I definitely want to learn more about. Any other questions? So I do have a slide with some resources. I'll just share that now before we move on to some other questions.
So Shirley, there are a couple of questions that just popped up in the question and answer session. The first says that there's not an incentive for mentors to provide feedback and to get to fully understand mentees. At the same time, sometimes it's very difficult for mentees to share information to mentors in their own departments or in RECs because they're afraid to look weak. Any thoughts? And I think probably each of us have some thoughts. I do think that this issue has come up. I don't know if Christine would like to talk about sort of a faculty support group that she developed that was really across departments. And one of the reasons for that was based on exactly what that comment addressed. So Christine, do you want to just mention?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really good point, that some things we just possibly could not, it might be impossible to address some of the issues with people that are formally our mentors within our departments and here at the university. And so I think it is useful to find workshops of maybe and whatnot in our professional societies. But one thing I have been a part of developing are these, what we call as POP circles, peer mentoring circles. And I wish there was a way that this was facilitated more broadly, but that's maybe something we could work on, where what we did at those workshops that I was telling you about, we would get together, maybe, I think it was 4 or 5 faculty members, and kind of teach them a method of essentially helping each other. Well, it wasn't just like, hey, let's chat with friends, right? I mean, that can be useful, but this was really like everyone got 5 minutes to share some dilemma and to get feedback in a very formalized way. And it was with people at different institutions, intentionally, no one at the same institution. The one that I led was international. I had someone from India, someone from London, someone from Costa Rica, and so there's just much more anonymity. I guess it's confidential what you discuss, and there's also a confidentiality pact. And it's really, I guess this comes to that idea of a community of mentors. Let's give people here what we can, but realize that they will need resources elsewhere, and let's help them figure out how to get those and get those mentors or even coaches, as was described, at other institutions, so that they're perhaps not that conflict of interest that is just going to be inevitable in some situations here.
So I put together a few questions for the people who serve as mentors, especially to junior faculty. What do you sort of feel are your responsibilities or scope in your mentoring?
Well, I guess I'll start with that. So I see that your responsibilities can be quite wide-ranging potentially in terms of what faculty need to navigate their environment and to grow professionally. And as Miguel mentioned, you're trained in graduate school to do, maybe 20% of what you're doing as a faculty member. And I think that's probably on the high end in some ways. And so there's a lot of things that incoming faculty just don't have experience with. And some of those things were discussed earlier in today's forum about leading people and how you hire people and so many related issues of running a lab. And the mentoring committee, and as a mentor, I see my role as being able to provide, if nothing more, some sort of perspectives on those issues. I might not have all the right answers, but I've probably had to go through and, maybe learn through error, as Jamie mentioned, I think in his presentation earlier, that you learn a lot just from trying and figuring out what works and what doesn't. And so I see it to be really cross-cutting in terms of professional development, departmental dynamics, etc.
And on the flip side of that, what makes a good mentee?
So I think, oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, who's that question for?
Anybody. We've all been mentees.
I mean, I guess I would say from the perspective of somebody who's been on, mentee and mentor, I think hearing from mentees what they need help with. And I realize that, that's a vulnerable thing to share, but, along the lines of the discussion about coaching, and thank you for giving us a little bit more information about that. I think that sometimes in those initial conversations about what is it that's helpful to you from a mentor, what do you need help with, you might get the sense that what somebody needs is not so much advice, but a place to process their questions, or a place to kind of work through their questions. I think coming to UF myself about 5 years ago, one thing I think I really needed was just, there's just a steep learning curve to the processes that are followed and how things are done. And so having a place where you could just say, what is that form? What do I do with that? When is that supposed to be turned in? How do I apply for this? So I think having some of those initial conversations, just to, what are you struggling with? How can I help you? And I think the more you get that information from a mentee, the more helpful a mentor can be. If a mentor doesn't really know what they can do to be helpful, that makes it challenging to be a good mentor.
I wanted to bring up the concept of upward mentoring upward, that's it, where mentees will, they don't sort of wait for mentors to tell them what they need. And this is following up exactly with what Lisa is saying, is, but it's also saying, hey, I really want to get this award, will you help me? And not being shy to do that, really helping as a mentor, what I really need from you is this, and really spelling it out, just that direct communication, because a lot of times people do want to help and they're not going to be able to guess. So I think it's a mentee that can ask for what they need, be specific, and of course then also can listen too, right? And is willing to sort of guide the mentor and then also receive the guidance.
Yeah, and on the question and answer, someone mentioned, one of our participants mentioned that it's a lot of times the effectiveness of the mentoring committee is really driven by the mentee and how much they reach out to the committee, because as you know, as faculty, we're all busy and we're all pulled in a lot of different directions, and it's easy to forget our mentees, right? As well as it's easy to forget that we might have a mentoring committee that we could reach out to. So,
can I follow up on that question? Yeah, so I think that's a real issue in my experience. And, you know, one of the reasons why when I was sort of giving my 5-minute overview, one of the reasons why I talked about what I did is to really hopefully emphasize the benefits of that engagement, right? And that there's real benefits in this mentoring mentee process if you take the time to do it. And ultimately, there are, you know, as per Ifas guidelines, you know, there's an annual meeting you're supposed to do. But when I sign on to be a mentor in one of these faculty mentoring committees, you know, part of that responsibility is to have an open door and an open policy for those faculty members where they can contact me really at any time to discuss things that are happening and that they need some sort of either advice or just, you know, feedback on in terms of their professional development. And I think it's important to be really clear with faculty that that's part of it, because that's where a lot of things get solved for new faculty, or they get some useful feedback that's really oftentimes time sensitive and can't really wait for an annual meeting. And so most of the faculty that I've mentored, they're calling me up sporadically to discuss things, or stopping by my office, and that's on the mentee to approach the committee, but the committee should be very receptive to that process, in my opinion.
Yeah, thanks.
I think along those lines, Shirley, I would just say, I think that's kind of what I was referring to about the mentoring right now in the midst of COVID-19, is that we have to be more intentional about that, because we don't have as many of those hallway pop-in conversations.
Right, yeah. Do you have any particular strategies for mentoring across gender, race, religion, sexual orientation, across diversity? Do you have any particular strategies for mentoring across different?
I guess I'll start. In general, I try to tailor my mentoring strategies to the individual as sort of a whole person. And I think everyone has different goals and objectives, and they're at different places in their career. And we can't use just almost a recipe, if you will, in terms of how we engage with people. And I think that is, you know, and part of that equation is, you know, cutting across diversity, cutting across gender, etc.
I know that I personally have learned a lot from mentoring a diverse group of people.
Yeah, I have as well. And I think that, you know, really important parts of this are to be really open to hearing about the experiences and perspectives. This is following up on what Rob was saying, like, you know, not to just assume that we don't really know it all. So learning in the process, as Shirley was saying, asking, don't make assumptions, you know, think about that they may be having experiences that we maybe don't fully understand. And I think also trying to create that safe space where they can, you know, they can point out if we said something uncomfortable or if there's an issue bothering them. And so I think really, you know, it's a lot of listening and learning ourselves. And in some ways that can be the best mentoring, right? And overall, just a positive relationship can develop in those situations.
Okay, it looks like it's about time to wrap it up. I just wanted to share some resources, and there's probably a way that I will be able to send this out. So the best practices for mentoring faculty that Lisa talked about, weaving the future of animal behavior that Christine talked about, as well as the CALS Mentoring Academy. And then Miguel mentioned the 7 dimensions of wellness. So I'll post that. And then there's some wider UF information.
If I can interrupt, Shirley, it's actually 8 because there's 2 sort of branches. So in that one, what it's missing is economic wealth.
Okay.
So that,
also very important.
Economic wellness, it's really important. And from the perspective of the students, I feel it's kind of interesting because, you know, as a student, we need to talk about those things too, right?
Yeah.
Usually as a student, we don't think about retirement, you know, and that's a conversation that needs to happen. So yeah, it's missing
Excellent. One. Thank you. And then some broader mentoring resources. There's a couple of EDIS publications and some other articles. So we'll get those to you. Are there any final comments? I want to thank our panelists for joining us today. And I don't know, Damien or Rob Gilbert, do you have any final parting conclusions?
Well, Shirley, thank you. Just simply to thank all of the moderators, all of the panelists in all 4 of our sessions today. This has been an invaluable morning. I've learned a lot on a lot of different topics, on work-life balance, diversity and inclusion, on managing people, and on mentoring. I took a lot of notes, and I'm glad this has been recorded. Some of the questions that have been asked are very important for not only our committees, but the Ifas Executive Committee to discuss as well on how, consider a path forward on diversity and inclusion, mentoring, and other topics. So thank you very much to everyone. Thanks all of you that participated, all the participants online. Keep tuned for the next research forum we'll announce shortly, and everyone have a wonderful day today. Thanks again.